My name's Eric, and I'm 28 years old. For as long as I can remember, I've been the punching bag in my own family. I was the quiet one, the awkward one, the broke one. Every family gathering was another reminder that I didn't fit into their perfect little hierarchy. My older brother, Jason, was the golden child. He could do no wrong. He was athletic, loud, and the kind of guy who filled a room with his voice whether you wanted him to or not. My younger sister, Megan, was the family's pride and joy. She was brilliant, hardworking, and in my mom's words, everything a daughter should be. Then there was me, Eric, the middle child who didn't shine in the same ways. My accomplishments never seemed to register. If I did something right, it was luck. If I failed, well, that was expected. The comments were subtle at first, the kind of digs you pretend don't matter when you're young. Don't expect much, Eric. Maybe you should aim lower, honey. Not everyone is meant to succeed. My mom had a special way of smiling while she said things like that, as though she were giving me life advice instead of slowly eroding my confidence. By the time I was in high school, Jason was already being scouted for college sports. Megan was stacking up awards, and I was invisible. I studied quietly, worked small jobs, and tried not to cause trouble. But to them, quiet meant weak, and small jobs meant failure. Fast forward to adulthood, and things didn't change much. My brother had a decent corporate job. My sister landed a cushy position thanks to my dad's connections. And me? They still thought I was the broke one. They never bothered to ask what I was actually doing with my life, never cared enough to scratch beneath the surface. And honestly, I let them think what they wanted. It was easier that way. That brings me to the party. It wasn't just any party. It was a big anniversary dinner for one of my mom's closest friends. Everyone was there, extended family, old neighbors, people I hadn't seen since childhood. I almost didn't go. I knew how it would play out. Me, tucked into a corner, ignored or ridiculed, while Jason held court and Megan beamed in the spotlight. But something in me told me to show up. Maybe curiosity, maybe something darker. The moment I walked through the door, I felt the shift. My mom spotted me from across the room, her lips tightening. She didn't even wait until I reached the table before she snapped, "Don't expect a real seat. You're just the broke one." My stomach clenched, but I forced myself to keep moving. Jason smirked, raising his glass. "Careful," he said loud enough for everyone to hear. "He might try to pay with coupons." Laughter exploded around the table. I felt every chuckle like a knife to the chest. I wanted to disappear, to turn around and leave before the night unraveled the way it always did. But then I saw Megan's boss, a man I had never met, sitting 2 chairs away, scrolling on his phone. He glanced up at me, then back down, then froze. His thumb hovered over the screen. His eyes flicked back to me, widening as recognition spread across his face. He whispered something to his wife, who leaned in, curious. Then he kept staring. Not the kind of stare you give someone pitiful, but the kind of stare you give when you realize the person in front of you isn't who you thought they were. And just like that, the laughter died down. Conversations faltered. The clinking of glasses grew softer. I watched, my pulse quickening, as Megan's boss put his phone face down on the table, his jaw practically on the floor. The silence that followed was deafening. That was the moment I knew this night wasn't going to play out the way my family expected. The silence after Megan's boss looked at his phone didn't last long. Jason leaned back in his chair, smirking, clearly enjoying himself. He raised his glass again, breaking the tension. "Relax, everyone," he said, chuckling. "Eric's harmless. He probably just showed up for the free food." That got a few hesitant laughs, though they didn't ring as confidently as before. My mom seized the moment, waving her hand as if brushing away the awkwardness. "Oh, Jason, don't tease your brother. He can sit at the end with the kids' table if there's no room here." She wasn't joking. She gestured toward a small table tucked in the corner, where a few restless children were coloring on placemats. My cheeks burned, but I forced myself to sit down in the empty chair near the far side of the main table, ignoring her suggestion. That was the thing about my mom. Her digs were always delivered with the air of authority, as if she was setting order, not cutting me down. My dad sat quietly, sipping his wine, saying nothing as always. He was a man who preferred to stay out of conflict unless it directly involved him. That silence had cost me a lot growing up. Dinner began, and so did the small talk. Jason launched into stories about his new car lease, boasting about horsepower, and features no one at the table cared about, but humored him anyway. Megan spoke about her big project at work, glossing over how she had only gotten the role because of my dad's introductions. My parents beamed with pride, their eyes shining with every word Jason and Megan spoke, hanging on like they were listening to celebrities at an interview. When the conversation briefly turned toward me, my mom jumped in before I could even open my mouth. "Eric's still figuring things out," she said, smiling tightly at the table. "You know, some people just need a little extra time. He's always been more simple." A few people chuckled softly, not knowing what else to do. My hands gripped the edge of the table, knuckles white, but I swallowed it down. I was used to being cut off. Jason wasn't finished. "Hey, remember when Eric tried that business thing? What was it again, Mom? Selling. What was it? Discount gadgets or something?" He laughed before anyone answered. "Yeah, that didn't last long. Poor guy couldn't even get his website working." He leaned back, clearly proud of himself. The table laughed harder this time, emboldened by Jason's confidence. I glanced at Megan's boss. He hadn't taken his eyes off me since he'd looked at his phone. It was unsettling, but at the same time, I felt a flicker of something I hadn't felt in years: power. Still, the hits kept coming. When the server brought out the first course, my mom actually told him, "Make sure you don't bring Eric any of the wine pairings. He doesn't know the difference anyway." The server froze awkwardly, then nodded, setting a glass of water in front of me instead. My siblings laughed again, Megan covering her mouth as if she was being polite about it. Every time I tried to speak, the conversation would pivot back to Jason or Megan. My mom would interrupt with a reminder of some small mistake I had made years ago, like the time I missed curfew in high school or lost my wallet during a family trip. She had a bottomless well of harmless stories that painted me as careless or incompetent. I sat quietly, letting them build their narrative brick by brick, the same way they had all my life. But this time, something was different. The laughter wasn't quite as easy as before. A few people glanced uncomfortably in my direction, especially after Megan's boss leaned over to his wife and whispered something that made her eyebrows shoot up. Jason caught it, too, his smile faltering for the first time. "Everything okay, sir?" Jason asked, trying to keep his tone casual. Megan's boss didn't answer right away. He just looked at me again, almost like he was trying to confirm something. "I just realized," he said slowly, "I've heard your name before. Eric, right?" The table went quiet again. My mom, sensing the attention shifting, quickly cut in. Yes, that's Eric. He's our middle one. Always been a little different from the others. But we love him anyway." I clenched my jaw, biting back every word I wanted to throw at her. Because the truth was, I had worked harder than any of them ever knew. And if this night was headed where I thought it was, that truth was about to come crashing through their carefully constructed image of me. But instead of speaking, I stayed silent. Let them laugh. Let them think I was the fool at the table. Because the longer they underestimated me, the more devastating the moment would be when they finally realized who I really was. And as Megan's boss reached for his phone again, scrolling quickly with a look of disbelief, I could feel that moment drawing closer. Jason had this uncanny ability to sense when he was losing control of a room. It had happened maybe once or twice before in our lives, and each time he doubled down, louder, sharper, more cutting, to keep all eyes on him. So when Megan's boss leaned forward again, still looking at me with that strange, calculating expression, Jason's smile tightened. He wasn't about to let the spotlight slip from him to me. "Eric's name is out there all right," Jason said, laughing as he leaned back in his chair. "I mean, Google him if you want a good laugh. Probably some embarrassing old photo, or maybe that failed Kickstarter he tried years ago. Remember that one, Mom?" My mother chuckled, shaking her head. "Oh yes, he was so convinced it would work. He even borrowed money from us and never paid it back." She said it sweetly, like she was reminiscing, but it landed like a slap. The table laughed again, some nervously, some with genuine amusement. I felt my chest tighten. That money, they loved to bring it up, as if it were proof I was irresponsible. But the truth they never mentioned? I had repaid it tenfold, quietly slipping an envelope into my parents' account years later. They either never noticed or ignored it, preferring the story where I was the failure who owed them. I stayed silent, keeping my eyes on my plate. But then Jason's smirk curved into something crueler. He leaned forward, dropping his voice just enough to make it sound conspiratorial, yet loud enough for everyone at the table to hear. "Hey, "Eric," he said, "remember when you asked me to cover your rent that one time? Man, I almost forgot about that." Everyone. Did you know Eric was practically homeless at one point? He begged me to help him out. Poor guy couldn't even afford a decent meal back then. The laughter this time was harsher, more pointed. A few guests looked down awkwardly, clearly uncomfortable, but no one said a word. My mom chuckled, covering her mouth with her napkin. "Jason, don't embarrass him," she said, though there was no real protest in her tone. She was enjoying it too. That was the moment. The betrayal. Because Jason wasn't just making fun of me. He was exposing something deeply personal, something I had confided in him during one of the hardest points of my life. I had been struggling after college, working 3 part-time jobs that barely paid the bills, and yes, I'd swallowed my pride once and asked my brother for help. He had agreed, smiling, patting me on the back like a supportive sibling, and then he weaponized it years later for laughs. I looked up, meeting his eyes. For a moment, the smirk faltered. He knew exactly what he was doing. He knew he was twisting the knife. Megan jumped in too, piling on as if sensing blood in the water. "Honestly, Eric, you should be grateful. Jason has always been so generous with you. Not everyone would do that. You should have learned something from him instead of, well, whatever it is you've been doing." The table nodded in agreement, the kind of empty approval people give when they don't want to look too closely. But Megan's boss? He wasn't nodding. He wasn't laughing. He was still staring at me, his phone now fully out on the table, screen lit up. He wasn't whispering anymore. His wife leaned in, her eyes darting between me and the screen with a look of astonishment. Jason noticed. He frowned slightly. "What? What's so funny?" Megan's boss didn't answer right away. Instead, he tapped the screen, turned it slightly, and then looked back at me. "Eric," he said slowly, almost carefully, "is this you?" Every head at the table swiveled toward me. I didn't say a word. My heart pounded, my breath shallow. Jason laughed again, though it sounded forced this time. "What? Did you find some mugshot? Don't tell me he's been hiding some scandal." But as the boss held his phone tighter, his expression unreadable, I knew the tide was about to shift. For the first time in years, it wasn't me who felt exposed. It was them, my entire family, teetering on the edge of realizing that everything they thought they knew about me was a lie of their own making. The betrayal cut deep. But in that pain, I felt something else rising. Something stronger. Because this time, I wasn't going to let it slide. I sat there frozen, the laughter still echoing faintly around the table even though most of it had died down. My mom leaned into my dad with a little smirk, as if Jason's story was nothing more than a fond family anecdote to be filed away in her scrapbook of Eric failures. My chest felt tight, but I forced myself to stay composed. Inside, though, I could feel the betrayal gnawing at me. Jason taking one of my most vulnerable moments, one of the few times I'd ever trusted him, and turning it into his party trick. And the worst part? Everyone went along with it. That night, after the dinner finally wound down, I drove home in silence. The road blurred past me, the headlights of passing cars slicing through the fog of anger and humiliation clouding my head. When I got back to my apartment, I sat in the dark for hours, still in my suit, staring at the wall. I thought about every comment, every smirk, every time my mom had dismissed me with a laugh, every time Jason turned my mistakes into punchlines, every time Megan had been praised while I was brushed aside. And what hurt most was how normal it all felt to them. Like cruelty was just tradition at this point. For the next week, I felt myself unravel. I'd wake up with the memory of Jason's words ringing in my ears. He begged me to help him out. I'd replay my mom's voice. "He's always been more simple." I carried those words with me like weights strapped to my chest. Even when I tried to work, I couldn't concentrate. I skipped meals. I avoided calls. My life became this quiet haze of shame and frustration. And yet, in that silence, something started to stir. One morning, after a night of tossing and turning, I opened my laptop. I stared at the glowing screen for a long time, my reflection faintly visible in the black before it booted up. And when it did, I typed my own name into the search bar. The results filled the page instantly, dozens of articles, interviews, features, all the work I had poured my life into over the last several years, all the successes I had built quietly, far from my family's view. Reading them, seeing my name in headlines, the quotes where I'd spoken about resilience, about building something from nothing, It was like breathing again after drowning. The world knew who I was, even if my family didn't. Or maybe they chose not to. But as I stared at those results, another thought crept in. Why had Megan's boss reacted the way he did? Why had his jaw dropped when he saw my name? He knew. He knew something my family didn't. And the way he looked at me, it wasn't pity, it was respect. Maybe even fear. Still, I couldn't shake the pain. For days, I carried it like a shadow. I stopped answering my mom's texts, which were just passive-aggressive reminders about family loyalty and invitations to more dinners I had no intention of attending. I ignored Jason's calls, which I knew weren't concern, but rather curiosity about what Megan's boss had seen that night. Megan herself sent one short message. "Don't make things weird for me at work." That one hurt more than I expected. Not a word about how Jason humiliated me. Not even a question about whether I was okay. Just self-preservation, plain and simple. I realized then I couldn't rely on any of them. Not for love, not for support, not even for basic decency. So I pulled back. I stopped trying to prove myself. I stopped giving them chances to twist the knife. I started quietly building a plan, not of revenge yet, not exactly, but of distance. I began sorting through old records, organizing files, updating accounts. I dug through years of photos and messages, remembering every moment where I had been made the fool. It wasn't masochism, it was clarity. For the first time, I wasn't just suffering. I was cataloging. And somewhere in that process, I started to think. Maybe I didn't have to keep letting them write the story of who I was. Maybe I could rewrite it myself. But before I could even figure out how, the phone rang late one night. It was an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Eric," a voice said cautiously. It was Megan's boss. I sat up straight. "Yes." There was a pause on the line, and then he said quietly, "We need to talk. Your family doesn't know who you are, but I do. And I think they're in for a shock." My stomach dropped. When I hung up the phone that night, I just sat there staring at the ceiling in disbelief. Megan's boss, someone I had never even spoken to before that dinner, wanted to talk to me privately. His tone wasn't mocking, it wasn't curious, it wasn't even casual. It was careful, respectful, almost cautious, like he had stumbled onto something far bigger than he expected. We met a few days later at a quiet cafe across town. He arrived in a sharp suit, the kind of attire that screamed authority, but his handshake was steady and genuine. "Eric," he said, nodding as if he'd been waiting to confirm I was real. "I have to admit, I was stunned at that dinner. I knew your work by reputation, but I didn't put two and two together until I saw your name." I stayed quiet, letting him talk. I'd learned long ago that silence often revealed more than words. "You've built something remarkable," he continued. "Your projects, the investments, the way you turn small startups into success stories, it's impressive. Honestly, I'm surprised your family doesn't shout it from the rooftops." I gave a small, humorless smile. "They prefer a different narrative." He shook his head, clearly baffled. "Well, let's just say if they had any idea who you really are, they'd treat you very differently." That conversation stuck with me. It wasn't just the validation, though I won't pretend that didn't feel good after years of being dismissed. It was the reminder that outside my family's narrow lens, I was someone. I had value, influence even. And in the weeks that followed, my life began to shift. Work picked up momentum in a way that felt almost surreal. One of the companies I had invested in hit a breakthrough, and suddenly my name was popping up in industry articles again. Invitations poured in, conferences, panels, interviews. My inbox overflowed with opportunities. It felt like everything I had been quietly building in the shadows was finally aligning, and I no longer felt the need to hide it. Financially, I was more secure than I had ever been. I upgraded to a larger apartment, one with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city skyline. Every morning, I'd make coffee and stand there, watching the sun rise over the glass towers, reminding myself how far I had come from those nights of eating instant noodles just to get by. And the strangest part? The less I reached out to my family, the more they seemed to notice my absence. My mom sent messages sprinkled with guilt. "You never come around anymore, Eric. Family is everything, you know." Jason called twice, leaving vague voicemails about how we should catch up sometime. Even Megan texted, though hers was sharp-edged, "Whatever you're doing, don't make it affect me at work." I ignored most of it, not out of spite, but because for once, I wasn't desperate for their approval. My silence was deliberate, powerful. And then came the subtle shifts. At networking events, I'd hear Jason's name mentioned. His reputation wasn't nearly as sterling as he pretended. Megan's projects at work? Turns out, they weren't as impressive when stripped of the family connections propping her up. For the first time, I could see the cracks in their carefully crafted images. They weren't invincible. They weren't untouchable. Meanwhile, mine was only growing stronger. The irony was that Megan's boss, after our meeting, became somewhat of an ally. He reached out occasionally, sharing insights or opportunities, sometimes even just checking in. The way he spoke to me was worlds apart from how my own family did, with respect, with seriousness. He treated me as a peer, not as some embarrassing afterthought. It was during one of those calls with him that a thought began to take shape in my mind. A dangerous, exhilarating thought. What if I stopped hiding my success? What if, instead of staying in the shadows, I let my family see the full picture? Not out of pride, not for applause, but to finally shatter the image they'd held of me my entire life. Because here's the thing, power isn't just about money or influence or recognition. It's about perception. And the moment their perception of me shifted, their entire world would tilt. I started to plan, quietly, carefully. Not revenge, not yet. But the setup, the rise before the fall. And as I stood one evening in my apartment, glass of wine in hand, looking out at the glittering skyline, I realized something I never thought I'd feel. I wasn't afraid of them anymore. The turning point came quietly, almost by accident. It was a Thursday evening, and I had just wrapped up a call with one of the founders I'd invested in. After hanging up, I noticed an email sitting in my inbox with a familiar name, Megan's boss. Subject line, "Thought you'd find this interesting." I opened it, and my pulse quickened. Attached was a copy of an internal report from Megan's company. Nothing illegal, nothing scandalous on the surface, but it told a story. The numbers didn't match the narrative Megan had been pushing at every family gathering. The big project she bragged about wasn't her brainchild at all. She'd been handed the pieces by others and was taking credit, inflating her role to appear more indispensable than she really was. I stared at the report, realizing immediately what it meant. Megan's success, the very thing my parents worshipped, wasn't built on her brilliance. It was smoke and mirrors, and her boss knew it. Maybe that's why he had reached out to me. Maybe he saw the same cracks I was beginning to see in my family's golden facade. That night, I pulled out an old notebook and began writing. Not venting, not journaling, planning. I started listing every instance of cruelty, every story they had told at my expense, every time they had cut me down. Alongside it, I wrote what I knew about them. Their weaknesses, their insecurities, their dependence on the image of superiority they held over me. Jason's entire reputation, for instance, rested on his supposed financial stability. But I knew the truth. He was leveraged to the teeth. He lived off credit cards, leased cars he couldn't really afford, and quietly borrowed from my parents when things got tight. To the outside world, he looked successful. To me, he looked fragile. My parents themselves were stretched thinner than they admitted. They had always acted like money was abundant, but years of funding Jason's and Megan's dreams had left them juggling debts behind the curtain. Their smugness at dinners, their insistence that I was the broke one. It was projection. And Megan? The report in my hands was proof that her career wasn't untouchable. Her image at work was carefully constructed, but all it would take was one spotlight in the wrong place to expose the truth. Piece by piece, I began to see the power dynamic shift. For years, they had convinced me I was powerless, worthless, the black sheep. But knowledge changes everything. And I was beginning to see that, armed with the right truths, I wasn't just capable of defending myself. I could dismantle the foundation of the little empire they'd built on my back. Around the same time, my professional life continued to climb. A quiet deal I had been working on finally closed, netting me far more than I'd ever dared to imagine when I started out years ago. My bank account reflected the reality my family still denied. I wasn't broke. I was thriving. And with each day, I grew less afraid of them finding out and more excited about the inevitability of it. Then came the invitation. It arrived in the form of a neatly worded text from my mother. Family dinner next weekend. Everyone will be there. It's important. Don't embarrass us by not showing. I almost laughed. The timing was perfect. They thought they were corralling me into another evening of humiliation, another stage for Jason's jokes and Megan's boasts. But to me, it looked like an opportunity. a stage of my own. I closed the notebook that night, setting it beside me on the desk. The plan wasn't finished, but the foundation was there. I had the knowledge. I had the position. And I had the means to finally, after years of swallowing my pride, show them exactly who I was. The only question left was how and when. The night of the family dinner, I walked in with the same quiet posture they'd always expected from me. My mom gave me a once-over, her eyes narrowing like she was checking for signs of failure. Jason was already at the table, loud and laughing, clapping backs as though he owned the room. Megan was dressed to impress, sitting close to her boss, clearly eager to show off her family for his benefit. I took my seat without protest, my expression calm. On the surface, nothing had changed. Inside, everything had. The first course arrived, and right on schedule, Jason started in. "Glad you could make it, Eric," he said, raising his glass. "We were worried you'd skip out. Probably thought you couldn't afford the gas to get here." He laughed, and my parents chuckled obligingly. I didn't bite. I just smiled faintly and sipped my wine. Then Megan spoke up. "Honestly, Eric, it's nice you came. You've missed a lot of dinners. People might think you're avoiding us." She said it sweetly, but her boss, seated beside her, glanced my way with a subtle frown. He knew better. That was my opening. I leaned back, setting my glass down carefully. "I've been busy," I said evenly. "Some projects take up more time than family dinners." Jason scoffed. "Projects? What? Another one of your failed ideas. What's it this time? Selling coupons on the street?" Laughter rippled, but it was thinner this time. The memory of last time, of Megan's boss going silent, still hung in the air. I let the quiet stretch just long enough before I pulled out my phone. I tapped the screen, scrolling, then turned it to face the table. On it was a headline. My name. An article about a major acquisition I'd been part of, one that had circulated widely in the business world. Megan's boss went still, confirming what he already knew. My mom's eyes narrowed, trying to process. Jason leaned forward, squinting, before letting out a short laugh that didn't sound genuine. "Oh, come on. That's just luck. You probably just knew someone who knew someone." I tilted my head. Maybe. Or maybe I worked for years while everyone thought I was a failure. Maybe I built something real while you were all too busy mocking me to notice. Silence spread like a wave. For once, no one had a joke ready. But I wasn't done. I turned to Megan's boss, meeting his eyes. "Funny thing about perception," I said calmly. "People think they know who you are. Sometimes they're dead wrong." He nodded, a faint smile tugging at his lips, and then, almost casually, he said, "Eric's right. In fact, his name came up in a boardroom meeting just last week. Impressive work. Rare to see someone build from nothing with that kind of vision." The effect was instant. Jason's smirk cracked. My mom's face drained of color. Megan stiffened, her fork clattering softly against her plate. I didn't gloat. I didn't raise my voice. I just let the silence settle, the weight of their realization pressing down on the table. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the punchline. I was the one holding the cards. And the beauty of it was that I hadn't attacked them directly. I hadn't raised a single insult. All I'd done was shine a light and let their own shadows do the rest. Jason tried one last time to recover, chuckling weakly. "Well, good for you, little brother. Guess even you can get lucky once in a while." But no one laughed. Not this time. Because the balance had shifted. And we all knew it. The silence that followed Jason's weak attempt at humor was different than anything I had ever experienced in my family before. It wasn't the kind of silence that came after one of their cruel jokes at my expense. No, this was heavier. It was the sound of people realizing, all at once, that the narrative they had clung to for years had just collapsed in front of them. My mother shifted uncomfortably in her chair, her lips tightening like she wanted to speak, but couldn't find the right words. For the first time in my life, she didn't have a ready dismissal or a cutting remark. She just stared at me, searching for this simple son she thought she knew, and finding a stranger instead. My father cleared his throat and reached for his wine glass, but his hand trembled slightly. He was always the silent one, the man who let my mother and siblings take center stage, but now even his silence seemed shaky, fragile. Jason, on the other hand, wasn't ready to give up his throne. "All right, fine," he said, forcing a grin. "So you got lucky. Big deal. You think one headline changes everything? You're still the same kid who begged me for rent money." His voice was sharper now, desperate, like he was clinging to a lifeline. But Megan's boss cut in before I could respond. Jason, he said flatly, I've seen the numbers. I know what Eric's done. And if you had even half of his accomplishments, people would be talking about you, not him. Maybe instead of mocking, you should be taking notes. Jason's face flushed crimson. He opened his mouth to retort, but no words came. His confidence evaporated right there at the table. And then came Megan. She slammed her napkin onto the table, her voice sharper than I'd ever heard it. This isn't fair, she snapped. He's just trying to make us look bad. Eric, why now? Why come here and do this? Her eyes darted to her boss, who was watching her with that same unreadable expression he'd worn at the last dinner. The panic on her face said it all. She knew her carefully crafted image at work was cracking, and she blamed me for shining the light on it. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't even lean forward. I just looked at her and said quietly, I didn't do anything, Megan. I just stopped hiding. The words hung there, cutting sharper than any insult I could have thrown. My mom finally spoke, her voice low, almost pleading. Eric, why didn't you tell us? Why keep this from your family? I met her gaze and let every ounce of hurt I'd carried for years show in my eyes. Because every time I tried to share anything, you turned it into a joke. You didn't want to see me succeed. You wanted me to stay the broke one, the simple one, the one who made Jason and Megan look good. So I stopped trying, and I built my life without you. Her face crumpled, the truth settling heavier than any denial could carry. My father stared into his wine, unable to look at me. The dinner limped on after that, but the dynamic had shattered. No more jokes. No more smug little digs. Jason sat in silence, his jaw clenched. Megan picked at her plate, her boss barely acknowledging her. My parents looked smaller than I had ever seen them. When the plates were cleared and people began to leave, I stood up, adjusting my jacket. For once, all eyes followed me, not with ridicule, not with pity, but with the weight of realization. I walked toward the door, pausing just long enough to glance back at the table. You wanted me to be invisible, I said calmly. But I'm not invisible anymore. And with that, I walked out, leaving them in the wreckage of their own making. That was the last family dinner I ever attended. Because the truth is, sometimes revenge isn't loud. Sometimes it isn't a dramatic speech or a final, crushing blow. Sometimes the most devastating revenge is simply standing in your own power, forcing those who mocked you to face the one thing they never prepared for, your success. And in that moment, as the door closed behind me, I realized something I had been waiting my whole life to feel. I had finally won. My name's Harry, I'm 28, and a week before what should have been the happiest day of my life, I overheard the kind of conversation that makes your stomach drop and your pulse hammer like you just sprinted uphill. I wasn't snooping. I wasn't creeping around the house like some spy. I was just walking down the hall of my parents' home after dropping off a box of decorations my fiancé and I had planned for the rehearsal dinner. That's when I caught the sound of laughter, muffled but distinct, and my name being tossed around like the punchline of a joke. I paused, thinking maybe they were telling some embarrassing childhood story. You know, the type families drag out for light-hearted laughs. But what I heard next froze me mid-step. Wait until the toasts, my older cousin Mark snickered. We'll make him look like a joke in front of his bride. Can you imagine her face? The laughter that followed wasn't friendly. It was sharp, mean, the kind of laughter that comes from people who enjoy cutting someone down. I don't think I breathed for a solid 10 seconds. My fiancée, Claire, and I had been planning this wedding for months. We weren't throwing some massive, over-the-top event. We wanted it intimate, personal, something that reflected us. And here was my family, my own family, plotting to humiliate me on one of the most important days of my life. To understand why that moment hit me so hard, I should back up a little. I grew up as the middle child in a family where my older brother, Ryan, was the golden boy, and my younger sister, Julia, was the princess. Me? I was the filler child, the one they barely noticed unless I was doing something wrong or inconveniencing them. Ryan was the athlete, captain of the football team, my parents' pride. Julia was the sweet one, doted on and excused for everything. I was just Harry. Quiet, average Harry. But I made peace with it over the years. Or at least I thought I had. I went to college on scholarships, worked jobs nobody else in the family would touch, and built my career from scratch. I met Claire, who saw me, really saw me, for the first time in my life, and I thought maybe, just maybe, my family would finally respect me once they saw what I'd built for myself. Instead, Old patterns never seemed to die. At family dinners, Ryan still dominated every conversation, interrupting me if I so much as tried to share a story. Julia had a way of dismissing anything I said with a little smirk, as though my words were background noise. My parents, well, they'd just smile and redirect attention back to the stars of the family. I learned to keep quiet, to avoid stirring the pot, to just get through visits without expecting anything. Still, part of me hoped my wedding would be different. I hoped they'd realize this was my moment. So hearing them laugh about turning the toasts, the one tradition meant to honor the couple, into some kind of cruel joke, that cut deeper than I can explain. It wasn't just embarrassment they were planning. It was sabotage. I stood there in the hallway, gripping the stair rail, feeling this strange mixture of anger and disbelief. Were they really so bored, so petty, that they'd ruin my wedding for a laugh? And more than that, what did it say about the years of small slights I'd brushed off? Maybe those hadn't been harmless after all. Maybe they'd always taken pleasure in making me the butt of the joke. I went back to the car that night and sat in silence before I even drove off. Claire had texted me asking how it went, and I couldn't bring myself to tell her. Not yet. The thought of her walking into that reception, hearing my own family cut me down in front of her friends, her relatives, everyone we'd invited, it made me sick. That night, lying awake in bed, the laughter replayed in my head on a loop. We'll make him look like a joke in front of his bride. I could still hear Ryan's voice layered over it, Julia's snicker, Mark's chuckle. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't just sad. I was angry. Truly, deeply angry. It was then that I realized something important. I couldn't just let it happen. Not this time. Not when everything I'd worked for, the respect I'd built, the life Claire and I were starting, was at stake. I'd spent years letting them walk over me, pretending it didn't matter. But this was my wedding, my day, and if they thought they were going to use it to humiliate me, they had another thing coming. I didn't have a plan yet, but the seed had been planted. As the days crept closer to the wedding, every fake smile at the rehearsal dinner, every patronizing pat on the back from Ryan, every sly look from Julia only fueled the fire. They thought they had me figured out, quiet Harry, who wouldn't dare speak up, but they didn't know I had been listening, and they had no idea what I was about to do. The morning after overhearing that conversation, I woke up with that same knot in my stomach. I stared at the ceiling, Claire's steady breathing beside me, and thought about saying something to her. But every time I opened my mouth, the words caught in my throat. What was I supposed to say? Hey, by the way, my family is planning to humiliate me during our wedding speeches. Sleep well. It sounded paranoid, petty even. Part of me almost gaslit myself into thinking maybe I'd misheard. Maybe they weren't serious. But the more I replayed it in my head, the clearer it became. The cadence of their laughter, the smugness in Ryan's tone, Julia's little snort. No, they weren't joking in that harmless, teasing way families sometimes do. They meant it. And if I ignored it, I knew I'd regret it. I tried to focus on work that week, but every email I typed, every call I took, my mind kept drifting back to those words. We'll make him look like a joke in front of his bride. The rehearsal dinner was scheduled for Thursday evening. Claire was buzzing with excitement all week, gushing about how everything was finally falling into place. And while she fussed over last-minute details like flower arrangements and place cards, I carried this silent weight. Every smile I gave her felt forced. I hated myself for it, but I didn't want to ruin her happiness with the storm brewing in my head. By the time Thursday rolled around, I'd convinced myself to observe, not react, not expose what I knew. I wanted to see if they'd slip up, maybe even test the waters of their plan. The rehearsal itself went smoothly enough. The pastor was patient as we fumbled through walking down the aisle. My groomsmen cracked jokes. Claire's family offered nothing but warmth. For a brief moment, I almost forgot. But then came dinner. We gathered in the banquet room my parents had insisted on booking, our treat. Mom had said with that tone that made it clear it wasn't about generosity. It was about control. I should have known it would be a mistake to let them handle anything. The room was beautiful, sure, but the way they strutted around, it was as if they were hosting, not celebrating me and Claire. I sat beside Claire at the long table while Ryan launched into one of his endless stories about his college glory days. He'd already told the same one at least 3 times at previous family gatherings, but this time he exaggerated it so much that even Mark and Julia were in stitches. Remember that game where I scored the winning touchdown? Whole crowd chanting my name. Harry was on the sidelines, weren't you? Ryan's grin widened as he looked at me. Yeah, you were the water boy that year, right? The table erupted in laughter. Claire shifted uncomfortably beside me, her hand brushing mine under the table. I forced a smile, but inside, my teeth clenched so hard I thought they might crack. It was such a small jab, right? A stupid high school memory no one but him cared about anymore. But it wasn't about the memory. It was about putting me in my place, reminding everyone who the real star of the family was. Julia jumped in next, her voice syrupy sweet. Oh, come on, Ryan, don't embarrass him. Harry's had plenty of achievements. She paused, tapping her finger on her chin theatrically. Like, remember that time you won the participation ribbon at the science fair? Another wave of laughter rolled across the table. I glanced at Claire. Her eyes flicked toward me, searching, silently asking if this was normal. And I had no answer that didn't make me sound like a child whining about unfair treatment. So I just sipped my water, letting the burn of humiliation settle deep. But I noticed something then. The way Ryan and Julia shared glances, the way Mark leaned in to whisper to them when the laughter died down. It wasn't random. They were practicing, testing material. The rehearsal dinner wasn't just about running through the ceremony. For them, it was a dress rehearsal for the humiliation they were planning. That realization hit me like a punch. The night dragged on with more of the same. Ryan dominated every conversation, Julia sprinkled in her subtle digs, and my parents. Oh, my parents just beamed with pride at their successful children. Dad clapped Ryan on the back when he launched into yet another story. Mom smiled indulgently when Julia recounted her triumph of landing an internship through one of Dad's connections. Meanwhile, when I mentioned that Claire and I had bought a small starter home earlier in the year, Mom barely blinked. Oh, that's nice, dear, she said before immediately turning the conversation back to Julia's decorating plans for her new apartment. By dessert, my patience was paper thin. Claire leaned over and whispered, "Are you okay? You seem tense." I wanted so badly to tell her everything, but I swallowed it down. "I'm fine," I lied, forcing a smile. "Just tired." After everyone left, I lingered behind under the pretense of helping clean up. That's when I caught another snippet of conversation. Ryan and Mark were by the bar, chuckling as they poured themselves another drink. "Man, this is going to be gold," Mark said. "Can't wait to see his face when we roast him. He won't even know what hit him." Ryan smirked. "Yeah, he'll just stand there like he always does, taking it." Same old Harry. My fists tightened at my sides. Same old Harry. The quiet one. The pushover. The family joke. I left that night with a fire in my chest. They weren't just planning a couple of embarrassing anecdotes. They were going to roast me. At my own wedding. In front of Claire, her family, our friends, everyone. And they thought I wouldn't fight back. The next couple of days were torture. Every time my phone buzzed with a message from Mom about seating charts or Julia about bridesmaid dresses, I felt this itch under my skin. My family carried on like everything was normal, smiling in group chats, posting cheerful photos on social media. But beneath it all, I knew what they were plotting. On the morning of the wedding, I stood in front of the mirror in my suit, adjusting the tie Claire had picked. She came up behind me, wrapping her arms around my waist. "You look perfect," she said softly, kissing my shoulder. For a moment, her warmth melted the knot in my chest. But then I thought of Ryan's smug grin, Julia's rehearsed smirk, and the laughter that had haunted me all week. My reflection hardened. This was it. The day they thought they'd get the last laugh. But I wasn't the same Harry they remembered, and I wasn't about to let them ruin this. The morning of my wedding should have been filled with nerves of the good kind, the kind that come with anticipation, excitement, and joy. Instead, I woke up with the kind of knot in my chest that felt like it was made of stone. I remember lying there, staring at the ceiling, listening to the distant hum of traffic outside our hotel window while Claire slept peacefully beside me. She looked so calm, so radiant even in her sleep, and all I could think was, she has no idea what's coming. I wanted to protect her from it. I wanted her to only remember this day as the start of something beautiful. But the echoes of my family's laughter, their smug whispers about the toasts, wouldn't leave me. My chest tightened every time I pictured Claire's face when those words were spoken, when the people who should be supporting us twisted my moment into a circus act. By the time I got dressed and met my groomsmen, my resolve had shifted into something hard and unyielding. I didn't know how I was going to stop them, but I knew I couldn't let them have the satisfaction of blindsiding me. The ceremony itself was beautiful. Claire walked down the aisle, and for a moment, the world stood still. Everything else faded. The whispers, the schemes, the anxiety. It was just her and me, our vows trembling on our lips, our families and friends watching. I could almost convince myself that I'd been wrong, that maybe my family wouldn't dare. But the illusion shattered at the reception. The ballroom glowed with soft lighting, tables lined with white linen and candles flickering gently. People mingled, laughter filled the air, glasses clinked. Claire's parents gave their speeches first, warm and heartfelt, filled with stories that made everyone smile. Claire's mother even teared up talking about how she knew I would cherish her daughter. It was everything a wedding toast should be: supportive, loving, genuine. Then came the moment I'd been dreading. My brother Ryan stood, champagne glass in hand, a smirk already tugging at his lips. "All right, everyone," he said, his voice booming with that obnoxious confidence he'd carried since high school. "I think it's time we talk about the man of the hour, my little brother Harry." The crowd clapped politely. I sat there, jaw tight, Claire's hand resting on mine. Ryan launched into his toast, but it wasn't a toast at all. It was a roast, cruel, cutting, and dressed up as humor. "Now, I've known Harry all my life, obviously," Ryan began, chuckling. "And let me tell you, it's been entertaining. I mean, this is the kid who once tried out for football and couldn't even put his helmet on the right way. Remember that, Dad?" The crowd gave a light laugh. My father grinned, nodding, as if Ryan had brought up some charming memory instead of dragging me down in front of everyone. Ryan continued, his smirk widening with every word. "And then there was the time he wanted to impress a girl at school by singing at the talent show. Poor guy couldn't even hit the notes. The whole gymnasium was wincing. Guess it's a good thing Claire isn't marrying him for his musical abilities, huh?" This time, the laughter was louder. Some people, friends of Ryan's, distant cousins, practically doubled over. I felt my face heat, my pulse thundering in my ears. Claire squeezed my hand under the table, her thumb brushing my knuckles. I could feel her discomfort radiating off her, and that hurt more than the laughter. But Ryan wasn't done. "No, but seriously," he said, holding up a hand as though to pause the chuckles. "I've got to give him credit. Harry always managed to scrape by. Never the star, never the one anyone expected much from. But hey, look at him now. He actually tricked someone into marrying him." The room erupted. The sound of laughter, cruel, cutting, jagged, crashed into me like a tidal wave. I glanced around, searching for an anchor. Some guests shifted uncomfortably. Claire's family looked stunned, but my side? My family. They were roaring. Julia covered her mouth with her hand, pretending to stifle her laughter, while Mark slapped the table, tears in his eyes from laughing so hard. My parents? My mother dabbed her eyes, overcome with amusement. My father leaned back, shaking his head, chuckling like it was the funniest thing he'd ever heard. That was the moment it hit me. This wasn't just Ryan being Ryan. This wasn't harmless sibling ribbing. This was coordinated. They had planned it. Every word, every joke, every humiliating jab. It was their grand finale. The trust I'd clung to, however fragile, shattered. I could almost feel the shift inside me, like a rope snapping after being pulled too tight. I looked at Ryan standing there, basking in the spotlight, and realized that my family had never once seen me as their equal. They didn't respect me, didn't even like me. I was their punching bag, their comic relief. And now, they'd chosen the most important day of my life to drive that truth home. Julia was next. She stood, her glass glittering under the lights, her smirk already rehearsed. "Now, Harry," she said in her sweet, condescending tone, "I just want to say how proud I am of you. Really. I mean, we all thought you'd end up alone with a bunch of cats. But look at you. You found someone who can actually tolerate you. That's incredible." The laughter rolled again. She wasn't even subtle. Her words dripped with cruelty, every compliment a dagger. She added, "Claire, you're a saint. Honestly, I hope you have the patience of an angel because, well, we all know Harry can be difficult, forgetful, clumsy. But hey, marriage is about compromise, right?" I stared at her, disbelief mingling with fury. Claire's cheeks flushed red, and her grip on my hand tightened until her knuckles were white. Mark stood after her, delivering his own string of jabs, stories twisted to make me look foolish, lazy, incapable. At one point, he even imitated me as a teenager, putting on a dopey voice and pretending to trip over his own feet. The laughter from my side of the family was deafening. By the time they sat down, the air in the room felt poisoned. Claire's parents looked horrified. Her siblings exchanged wide-eyed glances, and I sat frozen, humiliated, the weight of betrayal pressing down on me like a physical force. It wasn't just the words. It was the gleeful malice behind them. The way my parents had laughed along. The way every cousin and relative who'd known me since childhood had clapped and hollered as though this was the highlight of the night. They weren't just mocking me. They were mocking Claire too, mocking her choice, mocking the life we were building. That was the breaking point. I sat there, the room spinning around me, and something inside me hardened into steel. The years of slights, the endless dismissals, the casual cruelty, it all funneled into this one moment. This was no longer about surviving their mockery. This was about reclaiming my dignity. And I knew then, without a doubt, that I couldn't stay silent. But before I could even move, Ryan leaned toward my chair and whispered just loud enough for me to hear. "Same old Harry. What are you gonna do?" "Nothing." That was the moment the betrayal became complete. It wasn't just the speeches. It was their certainty, their smug, unshakable belief that I would roll over, as I always had. And in that instant, they couldn't have been more wrong. When the laughter finally died down and the clinking of glasses resumed, I sat there frozen, staring at the tablecloth as though it held the answers to a puzzle I couldn't solve. My hands rested stiffly on my lap, my jaw clenched so tight that my molars ached. All I could hear was the echo of Ryan's voice in my head, mocking, smug. "Same old Harry. What are you gonna do?" "Nothing." Claire's hand was still gripping mine, but it no longer felt like an anchor. It felt like a reminder of just how exposed I was. I glanced at her, and the look in her eyes nearly broke me. She wasn't embarrassed of me, not exactly, but she was furious on my behalf. Furious that people who were supposed to love me had just publicly dismantled me for their amusement. Furious that I'd sat through it, silent, trying to pretend it wasn't happening. I wanted to say something, anything, but the words tangled in my throat, trapped behind years of conditioning that told me to swallow the humiliation and move on. That's who I'd always been, after all. The brother who kept quiet. The son who didn't rock the boat. The filler child who absorbed the blows so everyone else could shine. After the toasts ended, the DJ called for music and the dance floor began to fill. The energy of the room shifted. People clapped, couples swayed, conversations resumed as if nothing unusual had happened. As if my own family hadn't just ripped me apart in front of both sides of the guest list. I sat there in my chair, watching everyone carry on, and for the first time, I felt like a stranger at my own wedding. Claire leaned in, her voice low but sharp. "Harry, why didn't you say anything?" I swallowed hard. What was I supposed to say? Start a fight in the middle of the reception? Her eyes softened, though her grip on my hand didn't. "No, but you can't let them do this to you. You can't let them define how people remember this day." Her words hit me like a stone dropped in still water, rippling outward. She was right. As much as I hated confrontation, as much as I wanted to disappear, I couldn't let their cruelty be the story people told about our wedding. But at that moment, I didn't feel strong. I felt broken. I excused myself under the pretense of using the restroom, slipping away from the noise of the ballroom and into the quiet of the hallway. My legs carried me aimlessly until I found myself outside, the cool night air brushing against my flushed skin. I leaned against the brick wall of the venue, tugging at my tie until it loosened, trying to catch my breath. My phone buzzed in my pocket. When I pulled it out, I saw a message from Julia. "Don't take it so seriously, Harry. We were just having fun. Lighten up, it's your wedding." I stared at the screen, my vision blurring with anger. Fun. That was their word for it. Public humiliation, stripping me down to a joke in front of my wife and her family. That was fun. Another message buzzed in right after, this time from Mark. "Classic. You took it like a champ though. Same old Harry, huh?" Followed by a string of laughing emojis. The bile rose in my throat. My chest heaved, my fists clenched, and I nearly hurled the phone into the parking lot. But instead, I shoved it back into my pocket and pressed the heels of my hands against my eyes until stars burst behind my eyelids. This was rock bottom. For years, I'd taken their digs, brushed them off, pretended they didn't matter. But this was different. This wasn't a casual jab at a family dinner. This wasn't a childhood memory spun for laughs. This was my wedding. The day I was supposed to feel celebrated, respected, loved. And they'd stolen it from me. I wanted to disappear, to climb into Claire's car and drive away, leave the reception behind. But then I thought of Claire's parents, who had looked on in horror as the speeches unfolded. I thought of her siblings, who sat stone-faced while my family roared with laughter. I thought of Claire herself, whose cheeks had burned red as she watched her new husband get dismantled piece by piece. No, I couldn't run. If I walked away, then Ryan was right. Julia was right. Mark was right. My parents were right. I would be same old Harry, the boy who stayed quiet, who took it, who let them write the story of my life for me. But I also knew I couldn't just storm back in and blow up the reception. That would only feed into their narrative. Harry the overreactor, Harry the fool, Harry the joke. I had to be smarter than that. So I stood outside for a long time, breathing in the night air, letting the sting of their betrayal settle into something sharper. Not rage, not despair, resolve. When I finally returned to the ballroom, the energy was in full swing. Couples danced, guests laughed, children darted between tables. Claire caught sight of me immediately, her eyes still burning with protective anger. She moved toward me, slipping her arm through mine, grounding me. "You okay?" she asked softly. I forced a small smile. "Not yet, but I will be." She studied me for a moment, as if sensing the shift in my tone, then nodded. As the night dragged on, I played the part of the good host. I greeted guests, smiled for photos, thanked people for coming. But under the surface, my mind was churning, sketching out possibilities, imagining outcomes. Every laugh from my family across the room was fuel to the fire. Every smug glance from Ryan added another stone to the foundation I was quietly building inside myself. I didn't say a word to my parents beyond the polite minimum. My father clapped me on the back, saying, "Great night, son. You've outdone yourself." My mother kissed my cheek and added, "See? Everyone had such a good time. You should be grateful." Grateful. That word nearly undid me. But I swallowed it, smiled thinly, and nodded. Later that night, after the last dance and the final farewell, when Claire and I finally slipped into our hotel room, I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor. She sat beside me, resting her head on my shoulder. "They're not going to stop, Harry," she said quietly. "If they can do this to you today, they'll do it again. And again, unless you stop them." Her words weren't an accusation. They were a truth I'd known but hadn't wanted to face. I nodded slowly, my hands clasped together. "I know." For a long moment, we sat there in silence. Then Claire lifted her head, her eyes meeting mine. "So what are you going to do?" I looked at her, and though my voice was low, there was steel in it. "I'm going to show them they can't treat me like this anymore. Not now. Not ever again." It wasn't a plan yet. Not even close. But it was a promise. To myself, to Claire, to the life we were building. The old Harry had died the moment Ryan leaned down and whispered those words. Same old Harry. What are you going to do? Nothing. And if my family thought I'd sit quietly in the shadow of their cruelty forever, they were about to learn how wrong they were. The weeks after the wedding felt strangely hollow, like a party had ended but the mess was still scattered all over the floor. Claire and I returned from our short honeymoon, but the laughter from that night still echoed in my head like a cruel soundtrack I couldn't turn off. Every time I looked at the wedding photos, I couldn't stop remembering what had happened just out of frame. At first, I avoided my family altogether. I ignored texts, skipped calls, and stayed away from gatherings. They didn't seem to mind. If anything, they carried on like nothing had happened. Ryan posted a photo of him holding a glass at the reception with the caption, "Best toast of the night." Julia uploaded a clip of her speech to Instagram, complete with laughing emojis in the caption. Mark shared a blurry video of himself mocking me on the dance floor with a group of cousins howling in the background. Claire showed me one of those posts and asked gently, "Are you going to say something?" I shook my head. Not yet. Because while my family carried on, convinced they'd won, I had started to shift. Something inside me had cracked that night. Yes, but it had also made space for something new. Something sharper, steadier. For the first time in my life, I wasn't content to stay in the background. I threw myself into work. By day, I was a project manager at a mid-sized tech company. I'd been good at my job, but never spectacular. Never the guy who raised his hand for the big projects. Never the one to step into the spotlight. That changed almost overnight. I stopped playing small. I started volunteering for the complex assignments nobody else wanted. I stayed late, not out of desperation, but out of determination. When the CEO mentioned a new product launch, I positioned myself right in the center of it, coordinating between teams, making sure my fingerprints were all over the success. It didn't take long before people noticed. My boss pulled me aside one afternoon, eyebrows raised. "Harry, I don't know what's gotten into you lately, but keep it up. You're becoming indispensable." That word, indispensable, sank deep. It was the opposite of how my family saw me. At work, I wasn't same old Harry. I was essential. Claire noticed too. She'd come home to find me at the dining table with spreadsheets open, not just finishing tasks but reimagining them, improving systems, making things smoother for everyone. She'd smile, kiss the top of my head, and say, "There you are. That's the man I married." Her support became fuel. Outside of work, I started focusing on myself in other ways too. For years, I'd ignored my health, content to coast on whatever scraps of energy I had left at the end of the day. Now, I hit the gym 3 mornings a week before work. At first it was brutal. Every muscle screamed. Every jog on the treadmill felt endless. But slowly, I started to see changes. The mirror reflected broader shoulders, stronger arms, a posture that no longer curled inward. It wasn't just physical. With every workout, every early morning session, I was proving something to myself. I wasn't weak. I wasn't helpless. I wasn't their punchline. By the 6-month mark, everything in my life looked different. At work, I'd been promoted to lead a major department initiative. My salary bumped up, but more importantly, my reputation skyrocketed. Coworkers started coming to me for advice, treating me with respect I'd never experienced from my family. In my personal life, I felt more grounded, more confident. Claire and I had started talking seriously about our long-term goals, maybe expanding our house, maybe even starting a family someday. But with all the growth came a kind of bittersweet realization. My family had no idea. They hadn't been part of any of it. And when they did reach out, it was always self-serving. Mom called one evening, her voice casual as if we hadn't been estranged since the wedding. "Harry, darling, your father and I were thinking, could you take a look at Ryan's resume? He's considering a new position, and you're so good with details." I almost laughed. Ryan, the golden boy, suddenly needed my help. "Sorry, Mom," I said evenly. "I'm swamped with work." Another time, Julia texted me asking if I could pull some strings to get her boyfriend into a training program at my company. I didn't even respond. The old Harry would have jumped at the chance, desperate for approval. The new Harry recognized what it was: manipulation dressed up as family bonding. I kept my distance, building my life brick by brick, until one day, an unexpected opportunity landed in my lap. Through work, I'd been introduced to a startup founder who was looking for investors. It was risky, but something about his pitch lit a fire in me. I crunched the numbers, did my research, and decided to take the leap with some of the savings Claire and I had set aside. For months, I barely breathed a word about it, quietly watching as the company gained traction. By the 1-year anniversary of our wedding, the startup had taken off in a way none of us could have predicted. My modest investment had multiplied several times over. Suddenly, I wasn't just financially stable. I was on the cusp of real wealth. It wasn't about the money, though. It was about what it represented. For the first time in my life, I wasn't surviving in the shadow of my family's mockery. I was thriving on my own terms. And as much as I wanted to keep it private, I knew my family wouldn't stay oblivious forever. Word travels fast, especially when money's involved. The first hint came at a family barbecue. Against my better judgment, Claire convinced me to attend. "We don't have to stay long," she said, "but it might be good to show your face." So we went. The atmosphere was the same as always. Ryan holding court with his stories, Julia preening, my parents doting. But this time, I wasn't the quiet shadow in the corner. I stood taller, spoke with confidence, let my voice carry. People noticed. Cousins I hadn't spoken to in years asked what I'd been up to, and when I mentioned the startup casually, their eyes lit up. Ryan overheard one of those conversations and swooped in. "Wait, you invested in that?" "No way. How much did you even put in?" I shrugged, deliberately vague. "Enough." His jaw tightened, his smile forced. Julia, standing beside him, tilted her head. "Wow, Harry, that's surprising." Surprising. That word held all the weight of their disbelief. They still couldn't reconcile the version of me they'd mocked at the wedding with the man standing in front of them now. And that's when it hit me. This was the rise. This was the shift. They didn't hold the power anymore. As Claire and I left the barbecue that evening, I glanced back at my family laughing by the fire pit. For once, I didn't feel the sting of exclusion. I felt something else entirely, anticipation. Because I knew this was only the beginning. The boy they'd humiliated at his own wedding was gone. In his place stood a man quietly building something bigger, stronger, unshakable. And sooner or later, they were going to realize just how badly they'd underestimated me. The barbecue was the turning point. It wasn't dramatic, no shouting match, no confrontation, but it shifted something fundamental. For the first time, I could see the way my family's eyes lingered on me differently. There was curiosity there, suspicion even. They couldn't quite pin it down, but they sensed it. I was no longer the easy target they remembered. Of course, in true fashion, they didn't treat it as an opportunity to reconnect. They treated it like a puzzle to solve, a new way to measure me against their own inflated egos. A few weeks later, my mother invited Claire and me to dinner. That alone was unusual. In the past, she'd always insisted family gatherings be big, chaotic affairs, with Ryan and Julia front and center. But this time it was just the four of us, my parents, Claire, and me. From the moment we arrived, I knew something was off. The smiles were too wide, the tone too rehearsed. Mom fussed over Claire like she'd never done before, asking about her work, her family, her hobbies. Dad poured me a drink and said, "Proud of you, son," like it didn't taste foreign on his tongue. I played along, watching carefully, waiting for the real reason. It came after dinner, when Mom leaned forward, her hands folded neatly on the table. "Harry," she said sweetly, "your father and I were wondering if you might help us with something. You know Ryan and Julia have so much potential, but times are tough. Maybe you could lend some guidance, or even some support." There it was. Claire stiffened beside me, but I kept my expression neutral. "Support how?" "Well," Mom continued, her voice light, "Ryan's been looking at houses, but the market is so competitive. A little financial boost could go a long way. And Julia is considering graduate school. Tuition is outrageous these days. But you're doing so well now, aren't you? It would mean so much to the family if you shared some of your good fortune." I set my glass down slowly, carefully. "So you're asking me to fund Ryan's house and Julia's education?" Dad chuckled, as though I'd phrased it too bluntly. "Don't think of it like that. Think of it as investing in your siblings. Family helps family." I glanced at Claire, whose lips pressed into a thin line. She opened her mouth, but I squeezed her hand under the table to stop her. "Not yet." I leaned back in my chair, forcing a smile. "I'll think about it." Their relief was palpable. They thought they had me. But as we drove home that night, Claire turned to me, incredulous. "Tell me you're not seriously considering it." "Of course not," I said. "But now I know." "Know what?" "That they want something. And when people want something, they make mistakes." That was the moment the setup began. Over the following months, my career accelerated even further. The startup I'd invested in announced a partnership with a major corporation, and my small slice grew into something far more substantial. At work, I was promoted again, this time to director. My salary jumped, my network expanded, and for the first time, I found myself sitting in meetings with people whose names carried weight. But beyond the money and titles, I started realizing something more important: access. I was in rooms my family couldn't dream of entering. I was learning things about investments, property, and influence they wouldn't even know to Google. And with every new piece of knowledge, every connection made, I felt the gap between us widen. The more successful I became, the more desperate my family grew. Ryan called me out of the blue one evening. His voice was strained, uncharacteristically humble. "Hey, little bro, listen, I've hit a rough patch. Car loan's overdue, and I don't really want Mom and Dad stressing about it. You think you could spot me just this once?" I almost laughed. Ryan, the golden boy, the invincible athlete, reduced to begging me for money. "Sorry, Ryan," I said calmly. "My budget's tight right now. Can't help." There was a pause, then a forced chuckle. "Tight? With all that startup money? Come on, Harry." I said no. I repeated and hung up. A week later, Julia reached out. She didn't even bother with small talk. "So, rumor has it you're doing really well." "That's great. Anyway, I was thinking of going back to school, but the scholarships are impossible to get." You'd be a hero if you helped out. Imagine how proud Mom and Dad would be." "Not possible," I said simply. Her sigh was theatrical. "Harry, you're being selfish. We're family. Family." They threw that word around like a weapon, as if the mere mention of it obligated me to bend. But with each request I denied, I noticed something shift. Their voices grew sharper, their smiles more strained. The balance of power was tilting, and they knew it. It was around this time that I learned something that would change everything. At a networking event, I struck up a conversation with a real estate developer who, as it turned out, was involved in a project in the very neighborhood Ryan had been bragging about. Out of curiosity, I asked about it. He laughed and said, "Yeah, funny thing. Some guy put in an offer on a place, but his financing fell through. House is back on the market." When he mentioned the address, my eyebrows shot up. It was the very house Ryan had been parading around on social media, acting like it was already his. That was when I realized just how precarious his situation was. Julia's wasn't much better. Through a mutual acquaintance, I learned she hadn't actually applied to any graduate programs. She'd been bouncing between temp jobs, living off our parents' help, and pretending she was exploring her options. And my parents? Their finances weren't as solid as they let on either. A casual comment from my father about downsizing eventually hinted at cracks I'd never considered. Piece by piece, the facade of their superiority was crumbling. And for the first time, I wasn't the weak one. I wasn't the dependent one. I was the one holding the cards. But I didn't gloat. I didn't confront them. Not yet. Instead, I waited. I listened. I let them talk themselves into corners, reveal their weaknesses, expose their desperation. Every conversation became a thread, and I tucked each one away, weaving them into something stronger. Claire noticed, of course. One evening, as I reviewed some notes I'd jotted down after a call with my father, she leaned against the doorway. "You're planning something, aren't you?" I looked up, meeting her eyes. "I'm preparing." Her lips curved into a knowing smile. "Just make sure when the time comes, you don't hold back." That was the beauty of it. I didn't need to rush. For years, they had mocked me, belittled me, underestimated me. Now, they were walking straight into the trap of their own arrogance, and all I had to do was be patient. The old Harry would have confronted them too soon, blown everything in a fit of emotion. The new Harry understood the value of timing, and as the months rolled on, the opportunities to set up my revenge grew clearer, sharper. The wedding had been their stage, but soon it would be mine. And this time, the spotlight wouldn't humiliate me. It would expose them. The months of patient waiting had a strange way of folding into one quiet, methodical plan. I didn't do anything dramatic. I didn't hire a lawyer or call the press. I did what felt most like myself. I collected facts, quietly and without fanfare, and let the pieces fall into place on their own. It started with the things anyone could see if they bothered to look. Ryan's social media flexing about an address he hadn't closed on, Julia casually posting about being so stressed with grad apps, while texts to me begged for handouts, Dad's offhand comment about downscaling. That suddenly made sense when I pulled their public property records. Then I gathered the more delicate stuff, screenshots, timestamps, the flippant messages where my mother asked for help in the same breath as she mocked me in front of our relatives. I saved Mark's videos where he bragged about the best roast ever. And yes, I kept that low, mean rehearsal clip, the one I'd heard the week before the wedding where they'd practiced the jabs and laughed as if they were putting on a show. I recorded it the moment I could, not because I wanted to hurt anyone for the thrill, but because evidence turns rumor into reality. I cross-checked every claim. When Ryan bragged about a down payment he supposedly had, I contacted the agent on the listing he'd been drooling over. The agent confirmed. The buyer's financing collapsed and the house was back on the market. No, Ryan had never completed an application. For Julia, a simple phone call to the registrar at the program she'd been name-dropping revealed she'd never even submitted an application. For my parents, a look at lien filings showed that a reverse mortgage talk they joked about at brunch was closer to real than they let on. Little contradictions assembled into a portrait I already knew was true in my bones. They were not as invincible as they liked to be, and they were willing to weaponize me to hide it. I also built allies quietly. I reached out to a few of the guests who'd been at the wedding. People who'd looked uncomfortable during the toasts. People whose opinion actually mattered when it came to reputation. I slid them copies of the rehearsal clip, not as gossip, but as an ask. Did you notice this? Do you think this is appropriate? Their responses were careful, but sympathetic. A couple of them admitted they'd been waiting for someone to actually say something. I kept all of that too. And then I planned the stage. There was no better spot than the next family celebration they'd inevitably host. My parents announced they wanted to throw a small dinner to celebrate their anniversary. Just family, Mom said, with that tone that suggested it was hers to orchestrate. Claire and I accepted the invitation. It felt almost too perfect, but that's what made it right. They wanted a show. I would let them have one, just not the one they were expecting. I told no one from my side what I was planning, except Claire. She was the only person I wanted in the room who knew the truth beforehand, not because she needed to be complicit, but because I needed her steady presence. She listened to the outline of my plan and met my eyes with the kind of fierce calm that steadied me more than anything else. On the night of the dinner, the house was the same warm, deceptive space it had always been. My mother fretting over flowers, Dad playing the host, Ryan and Julia trading the practiced banter of siblings who were always on the same page. Guests arrived, a mixture of extended family, a couple neighbors, and a few of my friends I'd asked to be there just in case. The table gleamed. The candles made everything softer. They had no idea the room had been prepped for a different kind of reveal. I'd arranged it so that the program would begin after dessert. There was a projector and a small speaker tucked behind a potted plant at the edge of the living room. I told my mother it was for a slideshow of photos from her early years. Who could refuse a nostalgic parents' night? She beamed, flattered at the thought. Her willingness to take center stage made the bait all the sweeter. When the coffee was poured and the talk lulled, I stood up. I felt my heart thud, not with fear, but with the strange calm that comes from standing at the lip of something consequential. I raised my glass, and in a voice that carried across polished wood and polite smiles, said, I know this evening is about Mom and Dad, and I want to honor them. But before we raise a proper toast, there are a few things I'd like everyone here to see. Things I think deserve hearing directly from family before strangers have to. Mom's smile faltered. Ryan's eyebrows climbed. Mark muttered something under his breath. The projector hummed to life. I tested it once that afternoon while pretending to help with their playlist, and the first slide came up, a casual photo of the rehearsal dinner. The sound rose, and with it, a clip of voices, laughing in the way I'd heard them months before. The sound was unmistakable. We'll make him look like a joke in front of his bride, Mark said, then Ryan's chuckle. The room's air seemed to change. A cousin who'd been mid-sip froze, fork halfway to mouth. I let the laughter hang over their faces for a beat. Then came a series of juxtaposed images and messages projected silently, but clearly. Ryan's post with the boast about the house we just bought, beside a screenshot of the agent's note. Offer fell through. Financing not approved. Julia's grad school. Insta story beside an email from a program coordinator confirming no application on file. Mom's text to me about helping the kids beside her Facebook post mocking my boring little life at the family barbecue. For extra measure, I slid in a cleaned-up clip of the toasts at our wedding. Selected lines, placed next to the rehearsal snippet. The room's chatter fell into a hush so loud I could hear the tick of a clock somewhere in the next room. I watched their faces as the truths appeared. My mother's hand found my father's under the table. He squeezed it like that would steady him. Ryan's jaw set like a man trying to keep a laugh from escaping. Julia's smile dissolved into something thinner, like a mask being removed. Mom's eyes darted to Mark. He was pale, embarrassed, and furious all at once. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The images spoke with a clarity that sarcasm never could. After a few minutes of absorbing the montage, I turned the projector off and let the final slide, a blank white screen, settle on the wall. The silence was total. You could have heard cicadas. Then Claire stood. She spoke first, not in accusation, but in fact. We invited you all here because family matters, she said, voice steady. And because we believe family should be honest with one another. These things happened. We can either talk about them, now, or pretend they didn't and let them keep happening. My mother's face flushed, her lips trembled. For the first time I saw something like fear in her eyes, and I felt a pang that surprised me. The old muscle memory of wanting to fix, to forgive, to be forgiven. I set my napkin down and looked around the table at the people who had made my wedding a spectacle. Why? Mom asked, voice small. Why would you do this? Because, I said, calm and deliberate. When something is done to humiliate and erase you on purpose, it needs to be named. You practiced humiliation. You celebrated humiliating me. And when people do that, it tells the rest of the world what's acceptable in this family. Ryan laughed at first, a thin, defensive bark. Come on, Harry. It was a joke. Can't you take a joke? You asked me earlier what I was going to do, I replied. You said it like it was a given I wouldn't do anything. So I did the thing you never expected. I listened, I documented, and I gave you a choice in front of people who matter. The choice I offered wasn't dramatic. I didn't hand down ultimatums or legal threats. I didn't humiliate them in return with insults. Instead, I said two things quietly and clearly. First, that I would no longer be the family ATM, counselor, or punchline. And second, that if they wanted any help from me in the future, there would be accountability and openness. No more secret requests, no more behind-the-scenes manipulations. If they needed me, they would ask honestly or not at all. That, I thought, was measured, almost merciful. But the measure of mercy depends on context, and they clearly had not expected anything like this from me. There was an intake of breath, sharp, collective. My father looked betrayed, like the ground had slid out from under some long-held narrative he'd used to justify his choices. Julia's face was a flash of anger and shame. Ryan's mouth trembled in a way that suggested he might either explode or crumble. Then Mark stood up abruptly, chair scraping back. You can't do this, Harry, he said, voice high. You had no right to record us. That's a violation. You had no right to plan my humiliation, I said, and the room contracted around those words. He pointed at me, fury distorting his face. This is petty. You're being petty. I looked at him, really looked, and for a heartbeat the old doubt seized me. Did I cross a line? Was I stooping to their level? Then I remembered every joke at my expense, every belittling comment, the way my parents had laughed while Claire's family stared in disbelief. I remembered the sick, hollow feeling of being used as entertainment on the most important night of my life. No, I answered, voice low, and that was the end of my doubt. This is not petty. This is boundary setting. A dozen small conversations tried to start at once. Aunt Claire, not my wife, asked for clarification. A neighbor murmured that perhaps matters should be handled privately. My father opened his mouth and closed it again. I let them talk. I let them sputter. I let them run out of steam. The reveal had been calm, precise, surgical, and that was intentional. I wanted this to be the moment they could not laugh away, could not rewrite by sheer force of family lore. When the initial shock began to ebb into awkward questions, I stood up, gathered my coat, and smiled in a way I hadn't smiled in years. Not smug, not triumphant, simply unburdened. Think about what you want your family to be, I said quietly as I put my hand on Claire's back. I'm done being the family joke. I'll be here for people who are honest, who ask in good faith, and who are willing to change. The rest of it, I'll let the consequences of your choices speak for themselves. I walked out into the night with Claire at my side. Behind me, the conversation picked up again, louder now, full of self-justifications and sharp breaths. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The montage had done its work. The record was out. We reached the car, and Claire squeezed my hand. You okay? She asked, voice soft. I felt a strange, new kind of lightness, but also a coiled tension that told me the fight wasn't over. I am, I said, but this isn't finished. They'll respond. People don't like being exposed. She nodded, understanding exactly what I meant. So what now? I took a breath and looked at her, and for the first time in months, I didn't feel like a man waiting on their permission to be whole. I felt like someone who had finally decided to write his own story. We wait, I said, and we watch. Behind the closed door of the house, muffled and sharp, I could already hear the first fractured sentences of the fallout beginning. The low, panicked calls, the whispered consultations, the hurried texts that would circle through family and friends. My stomach clenched at the thought, but it wasn't fear. It was anticipation, a readiness for what would come next. I started the car, and as we pulled away from the warm light of the family home, the night seemed to hold its breath with us. The drive home after the anniversary dinner was oddly quiet. Claire had her hand resting on mine, her thumb tracing slow, steady circles, but neither of us spoke. It wasn't because we didn't have anything to say. It was because we both knew the fallout was already beginning behind us. Back at that glowing house where my family's fortress of superiority had just cracked wide open. The text started that very night. First came one from Julia, angry and venomous. How dare you air private family stuff like that? You embarrassed us in front of everyone. You're disgusting, Harry. Then one from Ryan, more bluster than substance. Enjoy your little victory. Everyone knows you're petty. You'll regret this. By morning, Mom had sent a long, rambling message that shifted between guilt-tripping and pleading. We were just having fun. Families tease. You've blown everything out of proportion. But you're still our son, and I don't want this rift to last forever. Please, call me. I didn't respond to any of them. Instead, I went to work as if nothing had happened. I carried myself the same way I had been carrying myself for the past year. Calm, professional, focused. And it was strange, almost liberating, how quickly the silence between me and them started to feel like peace rather than absence. But silence never lasts in families like mine. Within a week, the ripple effects began to show. An aunt called me quietly, thanking me. I always hated how they treated you, she admitted. It wasn't right. But no one ever stood up to them before. What you did, it needed to be done. A cousin messaged me privately, saying, I didn't realize how rehearsed it all was. Seeing the video, it changed everything. They can't just pretend anymore. Those little confirmations weren't loud, but they mattered. They proved I hadn't imagined it, hadn't exaggerated. Other people had seen the truth once it was laid bare. Meanwhile, Ryan's bravado started to crumble. Word spread among the family about his failed house purchase, and when he tried to brag at the next neighborhood gathering, someone called him out. Didn't financing fall through on that place? He was forced to laugh it off, but the shine was gone. His image of the golden, untouchable son had a dent in it now, and dents, once made, are hard to polish away. Julia fared no better. Her grad school journey became a running joke after a cousin asked her, in front of everyone, how applications were going. She stammered, fumbled, then muttered something about taking a gap year. Behind her back, people whispered the truth. Her credibility, the carefully curated persona of the ambitious, intelligent younger sibling, had been punctured. As for my parents, their carefully constructed role as the proud, flawless heads of the family began to weaken. People had heard the recordings. They couldn't deny them. Neighbors looked at them differently. Extended relatives treated them with a politeness that had an edge, as if they were careful now, wary of aligning too closely with them. None of this was because I'd screamed or demanded punishment. It was because I'd let their own actions stand in the light. And actions, when stripped of spin, carry their own consequences. The calls from my parents became more desperate as weeks went on. My mother left voicemails, her tone slipping from stern to trembling. Harry, please, we can work this out. You don't understand what you've done to this family. My father, who rarely used words like sorry, left one short message. Son, maybe we went too far. But I didn't call back. Because the truth was, they hadn't just gone too far at the wedding. That night was simply the culmination of years of small cruelties. Years of choosing Ryan and Julia's egos over my dignity. Years of laughing while I stood silent. My silence had been their permission slip, and they'd used it freely. Now the permission was revoked. It wasn't all vindication, though. There were days when guilt tugged at me, when I heard my mother's voice on a voicemail and felt that old ache in my chest, the ache of wanting to be accepted, to belong. But Claire reminded me, gently but firmly, they made their choices, Harry. This isn't punishment. It's accountability. And she was right. The months that followed saw a quiet but undeniable shift. At family gatherings, the few we attended, my parents were subdued, watchful. Ryan kept his stories short, and Julia avoided making jabs. The laughter that used to come at my expense no longer filled the room. There were still smiles, still surface-level chatter, but the undercurrent had changed. The hierarchy they had enforced for so long had fractured. And for the first time, I wasn't walking into those rooms as the middle child defined by their ridicule. I was walking in as my own man, confident, respected, untouchable in ways they had never imagined. The real revenge wasn't the slideshow or the recordings. It wasn't exposing them in front of others. The real revenge was living a life they could no longer control, no longer diminish, no longer claim ownership of. The irony wasn't lost on me that the very night they had chosen to humiliate me, my wedding, had been the catalyst for all of it. Their cruelty had backfired, setting me on a path that ended with me stronger than I'd ever been. And the fallout wasn't just theirs. It was mine too. I shed the last remnants of the boy who swallowed insults and stayed quiet. I became the man who stood calmly and said, "Enough." 1 year after the anniversary dinner, Claire and I hosted a gathering of our own, a celebration of our new home, purchased with money I'd earned and invested on my own terms. We invited friends, colleagues, and a few extended relatives. We didn't invite Ryan. We didn't invite Julia. My parents were given the choice, and they declined, Mom citing not feeling well. As I stood in the living room, surrounded by people who respected me for who I was, not who my family claimed I was, I felt the quiet satisfaction settle deep. The cycle had been broken. The boy they had laughed at was gone, and the man they had underestimated had taken his place. I raised my glass that evening, looking around at the room filled with warmth and laughter, laughter that healed rather than cut. My voice carried clear and steady as I said, "Here's to writing your own story and never letting anyone else hold the pen." When I was little, I used to think that family always had your back, that no matter how bad things got, no matter how many times the world knocked you down, home would be the place where you could just breathe, be yourself. I clung to that idea like a life raft, even when the cracks started to show. My name's Dean. I'm 18 now, but the story really started when I was 14, back when I still believed birthdays were supposed to be a celebration, not a reminder that you don't matter. My family isn't huge. Just me, my mom, my dad, and my sister, Avery. She's 2 years younger than me. But growing up, she always acted older, at least when it came to demanding attention. From the outside, we looked like your average middle-class family. Suburban house, 2 cars in the driveway, family dinners where everyone talked over each other. But underneath, it was all about Avery. Every single thing had to revolve around her. She wasn't some evil villain. Let's get that straight. She cried a lot, sure. Played the victim like it was an Olympic sport. But she wasn't malicious. It was more like she expected the world to orbit her, and somehow everyone just kept letting it happen. Especially my mom. If Avery got a bad grade, it was the teacher's fault. If she threw a tantrum at the grocery store, it was because she was overstimulated. And if I ever dared to want something she didn't have, that was a problem. For everyone. At first, it was little stuff. I'd get a new pair of sneakers. Avery would sulk until Mom bought her a matching pair, even if hers weren't worn out. One time, Dad and I built a model rocket together for a science fair. Avery pouted for a week straight because we didn't include her, even though she had zero interest in rockets. That's when Mom made us build another one, just for fun, just for her, so she wouldn't feel left out. I remember watching my dad, exhausted after working all week, gluing fins to a second plastic rocket while Avery danced around in one of my old science fair t-shirts like she was the real engineer. I never really spoke up. I wasn't quiet, but I was careful. Strategic, maybe. I knew if I made too much noise, it would backfire. If I said, "Hey, this isn't fair," I'd get that long-winded guilt trip about how Avery's more sensitive than you, and you're older, you should be more mature. I heard that one so many times I could recite it in my sleep. So I learned to keep things to myself. I'd smile when she blew out the candles on a cake that was supposed to be for both of us. I'd nod when my birthday gifts mysteriously included matching sets so Avery wouldn't feel left out. And I'd bite my tongue when I overheard my mom telling her friends how low maintenance I was. Like that was some kind of compliment. But things started to shift when I hit high school. I got into AV club, then theater, and somehow, despite the nerves, I started getting small roles. Freshman year, I landed the lead in the spring play. Nothing fancy, just a local production of You're a Good Man, Charlie Brown, but still, it was mine. I worked hard, memorized lines after school, stayed late with the crew to build sets. I even let Avery read some lines with me when she asked, hoping she'd feel included for once. Opening night, I looked out into the crowd and saw Dad in the second row, beaming. But the seat next to him was empty, and the one next to that. I didn't see Mom. I didn't see Avery. I figured maybe they were late or stuck in traffic. Turns out, Avery had gotten a stomach ache an hour before the show. Nothing major, just cramps and a headache. But my mom didn't want to leave her alone when she was feeling so vulnerable. So they missed it. I brushed it off, told myself there would be other plays, other shows. But in the car ride home, Dad leaned over and said, I know it doesn't feel fair, but you were amazing. I'm proud of you, Dean. That meant something. It really did. But it also confirmed what I already knew. That sometimes, no matter how big your moment is, if Avery's having a bad day, the spotlight gets turned off. The real turning point didn't come until a few months before my 16th birthday. It started innocently enough. My mom was in the kitchen flipping through her planner, asking me casual questions like, would you want music at the party or just food? Or should we rent that community center down the street or do it in the backyard? I was shocked. After years of shared birthdays and cake compromises, it sounded like I was finally getting a real party. My own sweet 16. Not that I wanted anything extravagant. I wasn't that kind of kid. But the idea of a night with my friends, some decent music, maybe a projector playing our favorite movies on the garage wall, it sounded perfect. We started planning it in small doses over the next few weeks. I helped her look at themes. I showed her this cool neon setup I found online, string lights, glow paint, that sort of thing. Even Dad got involved, offering to grill burgers in the backyard. It felt like something was finally just mine. Then, about 3 weeks before the date we'd penciled in, I walked into the living room and found Avery crying. Not quiet sniffles, but full-on ugly sobbing into Mom's shoulder while she hiccuped words like invisible and left out, and nobody even notices me anymore. I didn't know what triggered it, but I stood there frozen until she finally looked up at me with red, puffy eyes and whispered, "You didn't even invite me." I blinked. "What are you talking about? Of course you're invited. It's my birthday." That was the wrong thing to say. Mom looked at me like I'd just kicked a puppy. "Dean, she's trying to open up to you. Don't be so dismissive." I didn't. I started, but Avery was already on her feet, running upstairs like a scene from a soap opera. Her bedroom door slammed, shaking the hallway. The next day, I got home from school and noticed the decorations catalog was gone from the kitchen table. My mom was making dinner like nothing happened, but something felt off. The tension hung heavy. I asked casually, "Hey, did you order the lights? I wanted to show you this playlist idea too." She didn't look up from the stove. "Actually, we're going to have to postpone the party." I froze mid-step. "Postpone? What do you mean?" She sighed, like I was the one being difficult. "It's just not the right time. Avery's been going through a lot. She's feeling very unseen lately, and planning this big party for you. It's just adding to her anxiety." I stared at her, waiting for the punchline, waiting for her to say, "Just kidding, of course we're still doing it." But it never came. I said quietly, "So, I can't have a birthday party because Avery's upset about not getting attention?" "She's your sister, Dean. Family means putting each other first. You need to be more understanding." I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I just nodded and went up to my room. And that's when I started planning my exit. Not a tantrum, not some dramatic rebellion, just a quiet escape route. A mental blueprint of how to get out, how to break free, how to become someone outside of this house where every good thing got filtered through the lens of Avery's feelings. That was 2 years ago. And last week, Avery saw me on national TV. What happened after that tore our entire family apart. But I'll get to that soon. Because first, I need to tell you what I did next. I didn't mark the date on the calendar or anything, but I remember the moment my brain snapped into that quiet survival mode. I was still 15. I had just lost my sweet 16, not because of budget issues or scheduling conflicts, but because my sister felt invisible. That was the exact word my mom used when she canceled it. Invisible. Like my presence, my joy, my milestones somehow dimmed hers. I wish I could say that was the worst of it, that I took that loss and turned it into motivation. But what actually happened was slower, creepier, like standing in a house where the walls keep closing in an inch at a time, and you convince yourself you're imagining it, until one day you can't breathe. It started with little changes. My mom, who used to at least pretend to listen when I spoke, suddenly developed a habit of cutting me off mid-sentence if Avery had something to say, even if it was just, "I forgot to charge my iPad." I could be telling them about a science competition I qualified for, or an article I got published in the school paper, and she'd turn away mid-sentence like I had disappeared. Dinner became Avery's therapy hour. My accomplishments were side dishes. One night, I was talking about the film club project I'd been editing for weeks. I was 2 sentences in when Avery dropped her fork and sighed dramatically. "I think I might be depressed." Silence. My dad froze mid-chew. My mom dropped her napkin. The next hour turned into an impromptu mental health intervention, and my entire evening, something I'd been excited to share, got erased like it had never happened. Now, I want to make this clear. I care about mental health. I do. I've got friends who've struggled deeply, and I know it's not something to be taken lightly. But with Avery, it always came in waves. Always right when someone else was getting attention. It didn't feel like suffering. It felt like sabotage dressed in vulnerability. And my parents lapped it up every time. I started spending more time at the library, more time editing projects at school, doing mock editions, applying to scholarships without telling anyone. I even stopped leaving my scripts or notebooks on the kitchen counter because I caught Avery flipping through one and telling my mom, "Dean makes the main characters too perfect." That's probably a sign of narcissism. I overheard it from the stairs. My mom hummed in agreement. They never even knew I was listening. I didn't argue. Arguing never worked. Logic never worked either. So I started hoarding small wins. I kept a journal, something private, offline, in a hardbound black notebook I kept hidden in the back of my closet. I filled it with plans, goals, schools I wanted to apply to, cities I dreamed of living in. I started crafting a new version of myself, one who didn't need approval, one who left. But life had a cruel sense of humor. When I turned 16, I didn't ask for a party. I barely mentioned it. I figured maybe they'd do a cake or a dinner, something small. But on the day of, my mom completely forgot. No text. No happy birthday in the morning. Just silence. I came downstairs and found a sticky note on the fridge. Out with Avery. She had a panic attack this morning. Be back by 5. I stood there holding a slice of bread, reading that note like it was a breakup letter from my own family. Later that evening, they came back with smoothies and takeout sushi for themselves. My mom looked surprised when she saw me on the couch. "Oh, you're home? I thought you had rehearsal." "It's my birthday," I said quietly. She blinked. "Oh, right. I've just been so overwhelmed with Avery. She's been in such a fragile place lately." My dad patted my shoulder like I'd just lost a soccer game. "We'll do something this weekend. Just the 4 of us." I nodded, but inside something cracked. Not shattered, just split. Like a fault line you don't notice until the earthquake hits later. That weekend never came. Avery got invited to a sleepover and needed a win. So our family dinner was postponed. Again, I started mentally counting how many things had been postponed or canceled because Avery needed a win. It was more than a dozen by then. But I didn't say anything. Just wrote it all down. The final straw came a few months later, and it still makes my chest tighten when I think about it. There was a statewide student film competition. Not one of those corny ones your school hosts, but a real one, judged by actual producers, with scholarships attached. I poured everything into my entry. It was a short film about a teenager who lives in a home where everyone speaks over him until he slowly fades, literally, until he's invisible. The only time people notice is when he leaves for good. Symbolic? Yeah, maybe a little on the nose. But it felt honest, personal. I didn't tell anyone at home about it until I got the email saying I was a finalist. Top 10 in the state. When I told my parents, they acted surprised, not proud. Surprised. Like I'd won a Nobel Prize out of nowhere, despite being such a quiet kid. Then my mom asked, "Do they allow guests at the screening?" "Yeah," I said. "They gave me 4 tickets." "Perfect," she smiled. "We'll all go." I was hesitant, but part of me thought, maybe this would be different. Maybe they'd see me, finally see me, not as the background brother, but as a person with something to say. The night of the screening came. I wore my one good blazer. My dad drove. Avery was quiet in the back seat. She'd spent the whole day talking about how she didn't feel well, but insisted on coming anyway. I didn't want her to, but I knew what arguing would do. So I stayed silent. When we got to the auditorium, there were cameras, journalists, a red carpet area with a banner behind it. It felt surreal. I saw other finalists taking pictures, laughing with friends. Some brought their teachers, their mentors. I was with my family. That should have been enough. We sat down in the middle row. My heart pounded as each film played. Some were hilarious. Some were dark. When mine came on, I heard gasps. People leaned forward. It got quiet, the kind of quiet you dream of when you're trying to say something that matters. The lights came up. There was applause. And then Avery stood up and walked out of the theater. Mid-applause. No explanation. My mom followed. My dad stayed frozen next to me, clearly torn. Then he muttered, "I'll check on them," and left. I was alone. Alone in a room full of people clapping for me. Alone when they announced I won 3rd place. Alone when they handed me the certificate and a small envelope with a $2,000 scholarship inside. Alone in the group photo. I texted my dad. "Where are you?" No response. After the event ended, I waited outside for 40 minutes before finally walking to a nearby gas station and calling a friend to pick me up. They never even noticed I left. That night, I got home and found Avery curled up on the couch with a blanket and tea. She looked up at me and whispered, "I'm sorry. I just had a really bad panic attack during your movie. I think it triggered me." My mom gave me a look like I'd punched her. "How could you not check on your sister? She needed you." I felt something cold and sharp crawl up my spine. "You left me during the most important moment of my life so far. And now I'm the villain." "You need to learn empathy," she said softly, as if I had disappointed them. And that's when I stopped waiting for them to see me. From that moment on, I became two people. Dean, the quiet, respectful son who nodded and smiled and said sure and okay. And then the real me, the one who applied to schools out of state without telling them, the one who built a new portfolio under a pseudonym, the one who started working with an online creator who loved my editing style and eventually offered me contract work. Remote, of course. Paid well. Quiet gig. No spotlight. Just impact. I made enough to buy my own gear. Bought a second phone. Set up a P.O. box. Paid for an expedited passport. They never noticed. I got accepted into one of the top media schools on the East Coast. Not just accepted, given a full-ride scholarship thanks to a program that recognized underserved creatives. Underserved. Yeah, that fit. I didn't tell them. Instead, I told them I was going to a local community college part-time while working at a bookstore. They believed it. Why wouldn't they? Dean was so low maintenance. So independent. And then, last month, something wild happened. One of the projects I'd been working on, an indie series, blew up. It hit streaming. The showrunner thanked me publicly in an interview. Used my pseudonym, but included clips. I wasn't on camera, but my style was. My name. My words. All out there. It was trending. And that's when Avery saw it. I came home that night to screaming. Full-on screaming. From the porch. Avery was holding her phone, red-faced, trembling. "You lied to us," she shouted. "You've been on TV? People are messaging me asking if you're my brother." My mom was sobbing. My dad just kept repeating, "What is happening?" That was when I said the one thing I'd been rehearsing for years. "I told you I was invisible. You just didn't listen." And then everything exploded. But I'll get to that soon. Because what happened next was worse than anything I'd planned for. When Avery screamed that night, I didn't respond the way she expected. She was used to me backing down, apologizing, smoothing things over, shrinking myself to make her more comfortable. But I didn't flinch. I just stood there, calm and quiet, like someone watching a storm roll through from behind a locked door. I think that's what unsettled her the most. Not the fact that I had been on TV or that I'd hidden things from them. It was the realization that I didn't need her approval, or theirs. She kept pacing the porch in a fury, phone still clutched in her hand like it was evidence in a trial. "You lied, Dean. You lied to all of us. Who even are you? You had this whole secret life, and you didn't think we deserved to know? You deserved to know when you started caring," I said, voice low but steady. "But you never asked." That made my mom cry harder. "How can you say that to your own family?" I turned to her. "You canceled my 16th birthday because Avery felt overlooked. You left me alone the night I won a scholarship. You've made every accomplishment I've ever had feel like a threat to her self-esteem." So yeah, I stopped sharing. Because it didn't feel like family anymore. My dad tried to step in. "Look, I get it. I know things haven't always been fair." I cut him off, not angrily, just finally. "No, Dad. Things haven't ever been fair. You just didn't want to see it." That shut him up. After that, I went upstairs. I didn't slam the door. Didn't pack a bag. I just sat down on the edge of my bed and stared at my desk. The same desk I'd used to plan my quiet escape. The same one I wrote scripts at. Sent out film edits. Took meetings while pretending to be doing homework. I heard the muffled arguing downstairs for hours. My name, over and over. Accusations and guilt trips and dramatic sniffles. Eventually, the house went quiet. No one came to my room. No one knocked. The next morning, I came down to find Avery gone. My mom sat at the kitchen table, red-eyed and pale. She looked up at me like I was a stranger. "I don't understand how we got here," she whispered. I didn't respond. Because I did understand. And I was tired of explaining it to people who never listened. I walked out the door and didn't come back that night. I stayed with a friend. slept on a couch, ate cereal for dinner. And weirdly, I felt free. Not happy exactly, but weightless. Like I'd been carrying a backpack full of bricks for years, and someone had finally cut the straps. But freedom doesn't fix everything. Over the next few weeks, things got messy. Avery posted cryptic things online. Betrayal is real. Imagine growing up with a brother who thinks success means abandonment. And my favorite, fame really changes people. I ignored it, but my DMs didn't. Old classmates, extended relatives, even teachers reached out asking, "What happened between you and your sister?" Some were curious. Others were clearly fishing for drama. My parents called, texted, left voicemails. At first, they were angry, then heartbroken, then confused. My mom sent a long email about how family is messy but worth it, and how she always tried her best. It ended with, "Please come home. We can fix this." But she still hadn't asked what I wanted. So I didn't answer. Instead, I focused on what I could control. I doubled down on my work. The project that got me recognition kept climbing. I got offers, small at first, then bigger. A well-known documentarian asked if I'd be interested in editing a miniseries. A screenwriter I'd met in a virtual workshop offered to mentor me. I applied for a summer residency in LA and got in. Full ride. Flights and housing included. I was 17, with one foot in the real world and the other still technically in high school. I finished my diploma early through online courses, something I'd started quietly during quarantine, and finished while everyone thought I was just gaming. When the acceptance letter came, I stared at it for 10 minutes without blinking. I'd done it. I was leaving. Not just the house. The whole system. The emotional economy I'd grown up in, where Avery's feelings were currency and mine were background noise. I was stepping out of the supporting role and into my own story. But success isn't a magic wand. It doesn't erase the scars. And there were plenty. I had nights where I questioned everything. Times I'd sit on the edge of a hotel bed or an airport bench and wonder if maybe I'd overreacted. Maybe I'd been too cold. Maybe if I'd just explained things better, they would have understood. But then I'd remember birthdays missed, plays walked out of, apologies never spoken, and I'd ground myself again. I wasn't running away. I was finally choosing myself. And choosing yourself hurts. At first, I started therapy during my residency. Free, provided by the program. My therapist was a middle-aged guy with a soft voice and a warm laugh. The first time I told him about my Sweet 16 being canceled, he didn't give me the usual, "Well, maybe your parents didn't know better" response. He just shook his head and said, "That was a loss. You're allowed to grieve it." I sat in silence for a long time after that. Grieve. That word stuck with me, because that's what it was. I wasn't just leaving a house. I was grieving a fantasy. The fantasy that someday my family would turn around and say, "We see you now. We're sorry." That fantasy kept me trapped for years. Letting it go felt like losing something, but also like gaining air. I started documenting everything. Not in a revenge way, just reflections. Journaling again, but this time with purpose. My therapist encouraged it. So I wrote about the little moments. The unfairness. The confusion. But also the quiet victories. The first time I paid rent with money I earned doing something I loved. The first time someone in the industry called me brilliant and meant it. The first time I went to a film festival and someone recognized my work. That summer, I lived in a tiny dorm in LA with 3 other creatives, all older than me. I was the youngest by far, but no one treated me like a kid. They respected my ideas, asked for my feedback. One night, one of them, a cinematographer from Chicago, looked at me after a long editing session and said, "Man, you've got something. Like, something real. Where'd you learn this?" I shrugged. "Just life, I guess." He grinned. "Well, life did you a favor then." I smiled, but deep down I knew the truth. Life hadn't done me a favor. It had tried to bury me. I just chose to grow anyway. One evening, toward the end of the residency, we all gathered on the rooftop to watch the sunset over the city. Someone brought a speaker. Music played. There were no red carpets, no applause, just quiet laughter and glowing sky. And for the first time in years, I felt peace. Not adrenaline, not hunger, not revenge, just peace. That night, I checked my phone and saw another email from my mom. Shorter than usual. "Avery's been spiraling. She thinks you hate her. I don't know how to help her anymore. I don't know how to fix what we broke. Please, Dean, if there's a way back, tell me what it is." I stared at the message. For once, it didn't make me angry. It just made me sad, because I had wanted a way back for years. But now I wasn't sure I wanted to return to something that never truly had space for me. Still, I didn't reply. Not yet, because something else was coming. Something I didn't see coming. And it would be the moment everything came to a head. Avery's breakdown had just begun, and the next time I saw her, she wouldn't be screaming. She'd be silent, broken, and for the first time, the power dynamics in our family would shift. But that is where things get complicated. I didn't reply to that last email from my mom. Not because I wanted to punish her. Honestly, I didn't even feel angry anymore, but because I needed space to think. Her message wasn't laced with guilt trips this time, or emotional landmines disguised as questions. It was raw, quiet, maybe even sincere. But sincerity doesn't fix years of damage. It doesn't refill birthday candles that were never lit or applause that never echoed when you needed it most. Instead of replying, I let it sit in my inbox and turned my focus to something else. The future. I was 18 now, officially an adult. I had a resume, a growing network, a scholarship, and 3 more freelance offers than I could realistically handle in a week. I had just wrapped editing on a limited series that premiered at a niche but respected festival, and one of the producers pulled me aside and asked, "Where are you planning to go after this program?" I told her the truth. "I'm not sure yet." She nodded like she understood something more than what I said out loud. Sometimes you don't need to know exactly where you're going. You just need to know where not to go back to. That line stuck with me. I wrote it down. I was building something new, slowly, carefully. And yet, part of me still carried the bruises from before. You can leave a place, but its fingerprints don't always wash off right away. They linger. In your voice, your posture, your silence. And that silence broke one morning in the middle of September. I woke up to 3 missed calls from my cousin Eli, followed by a single text. "Bro, you need to see this. Call me." Eli was one of the few relatives I still kept in touch with. We weren't super close growing up. He lived 2 towns over, but he was smart, laid back, and always saw through Avery's dramatics like it was second nature. After the whole TV blow-up, he messaged me once with just 2 words, "Finally, dude." That was it. No questions. No pressure. So when he said to call, I did. He answered on the first ring. "You're not gonna believe this," he said, without so much as a hello. "Avery started a GoFundMe." I blinked. "A what?" "A GoFundMe. Like a real one. She's raising money to recover from emotional trauma inflicted by a family member's betrayal." I sat up. "You're joking." "I wish." She wrote this whole sob story about how her brother became famous, abandoned the family, and left her emotionally shattered. She's asking for $5,000 to start a healing journey through travel and therapeutic coaching. I opened my laptop. There it was. The title, "Help Avery Heal from Family Trauma." The bio was wild. It painted me as this fame-obsessed narcissist who had cut off his only sibling to pursue wealth and status. It claimed I refused to speak to his own mother during a mental health crisis, and implied that I'd become someone who steps on the backs of others to climb higher. There were no names, no photos. But anyone who knew our family, anyone who even followed us on social media back in the day, would immediately know who she was talking about. And the worst part? She'd already raised $1,300. I stared at the page, my stomach curling. There were comments from old acquaintances, some sympathetic, others just nosy. "You've always been the sweetest soul, Avery. I'm so sorry you're going through this. Can't believe Dean turned out that way. Unreal. Family can be so toxic. Stay strong." I wanted to throw my laptop across the room, but I didn't. I closed it, took a breath. Then I asked Eli, "How long has this been up?" "About 48 hours, he said. "It's spreading fast." A couple of drama accounts picked it up on Instagram. I clenched my jaw. She really crossed a line. "You gonna say something?" "No," I said. There was a pause. "You're gonna do something, aren't you?" I didn't answer. Because yeah, I was going to do something. But not now. Not loud. Not petty. I'd spent years being invisible in my own family. I'd learned how to move quietly, how to observe before acting. And if Avery wanted to play victim on a public stage, then fine. She'd get an audience. She just wouldn't like the show I had planned. That night, I started writing. Not a revenge plot, not exactly, but something that had been brewing for months. I had a folder of essays and reflections, scenes from my life, unfiltered and real. I turned them into a script. A short-form docuseries. 3 episodes. 10 minutes each. About growing up in a household where one person's emotions ruled the ecosystem. About being the easy child, the one who didn't complain, and how that role becomes a prison. About invisible abuse, emotional neglect, favoritism that doesn't look like abuse until you're on the other side of it. I didn't name anyone. I didn't need to. The truth, when told honestly, doesn't require pointing fingers. I pitched it to a producer I'd worked with on a past project. She read the script in 2 days and called me with a voice full of excitement. "This is it," she said. "This is what people need to hear right now." We moved fast, casting voiceover talent, gathering footage, animating metaphors. One scene showed a birthday cake slowly sliding off a table while everyone chased balloons held by a crying child in the corner. Another showed a gold trophy slowly being buried under a pile of participation ribbons. It was subtle. It was raw. It was mine. And while we were working on that, Avery kept going. She posted Instagram stories about how some people will literally become famous just to hurt you. She started a private Discord for her healing community, where she told curated stories about my alleged cruelty. At one point, she even made merch, "Choose peace, not pressure." A quote she claimed came from her therapist, but had actually been something I once wrote in my journal when I was 16. Eli sent me screenshots weekly. I told him not to engage. "Let her run it dry," I said. "She's building her own collapse." But I wasn't just sitting back. I started making quiet moves. First, I sent an anonymous tip to GoFundMe's support team with screenshots from group chats Avery had posted in, bragging that she'd used the money for a trip to Bali, not therapy. Her fundraiser was flagged for review within 72 hours. Then, I reached out to a few mutual acquaintances, people who had been sucked into Avery's version of the story. I didn't defend myself. I just shared a link to the first episode of my upcoming series and said, "This is my side. Watch if you want." I didn't promote it heavily. No hashtags. No drama bait. Just the truth. And it worked. When the first episode dropped, the comments were cautious at first, people unsure of what they were seeing. Then came the flood. I grew up the same way, always told to be the strong one. It's suffocating. This hit so hard. The scene with the cake? That was my childhood. People don't realize how dangerous emotional favoritism is. Thank you for this. It wasn't about Avery anymore. It was about every invisible kid who grew up thinking being low maintenance was a virtue. And the more people resonated with it, the more Avery unraveled. She posted a 20-minute IG Live full of vague references and veiled accusations. "They say I was the favorite," she sobbed. "But do you know what it's like to constantly be watched? To have your emotions monitored like a time bomb? I was the one who felt everything, and no one protected me from that." People sympathized, but others started questioning her. In the comments, "Wait, isn't this the girl who made the GoFundMe? This feels performative. I think she's missing the point of the docuseries." And finally, "Avery, are you okay? I wasn't trying to hurt her. Truly, I just wanted to tell my story." But something had shifted. People weren't buying the narrative she built. And for the first time in her life, Avery couldn't control the emotional weather of the room. She was losing her grip. And I wasn't even in the room. I was preparing for something bigger. The final episode. The one where I wouldn't just talk about the past. I'd talk about what it means to reclaim your story. To find your voice after years of silence. To forgive, not for others, but for yourself. But before I could finish it, something happened. Avery messaged me. Not a DM. Not a text. A real email. "I watched your series. I don't know what I expected. But it wasn't that. I thought you were punishing me. Now I'm not so sure. Are we ever going to talk again?" I stared at it for a long time. And then, almost reflexively, I opened my old journal. Page after page of words written by a kid who just wanted to be seen. Then I clicked New Message and started typing, because the next step wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about deciding what kind of person I wanted to be now that I finally had a choice. But I hadn't made that decision yet. Not fully, because what Avery did next changed everything. Again, I never responded to Avery's email. Not right away, anyway. It wasn't out of pettiness or pride. I just didn't know what to say to someone who'd spent 2 years painting me as the villain in a play I didn't audition for. I read the message again and again, trying to find the version of my sister who used to beg me to play hide and seek, who once cried when I scraped my knee, who left a glittery note under my pillow after my first school play. But that girl was long gone. Or maybe she'd never existed the way I remembered. What I did know, though, was this. I wasn't going back to being silent. And I wasn't done telling my story. The final episode of my docuseries was almost ready. We had footage. We had the emotional arc. But something was missing. A final act. A moment that tied it all together. Something that would make the audience stop and say, "Oh, now I understand everything." And then, like clockwork, Avery gave it to me. It was a Thursday evening, a few days after she sent the email. I was scrolling mindlessly when I saw a Reddit post trending on r/assistants. The username didn't stand out at first, but the story did. My brother became semi-famous and left our family behind. My parents are depressed. I'm struggling with mental health. I'm 17 and need help affording therapy. I feel so lost. Attached was a photo of her. Hair tousled, eyes red, looking down into the camera with what I can only describe as curated despair. It was performative, yes, but convincing. She had that look. The kind that made strangers want to save her. Comments poured in. Advice. Venmo offers. A few links to low-cost therapy programs. And then someone recognized her. Wait, isn't this Avery? The girl who had that GoFundMe that got pulled. Things snowballed. Fast. One user dug into her Instagram and found screenshots of a since-deleted story where she bragged about planning a vacation after all the stress. Someone else posted side-by-side images, her emotional Reddit post versus a recent selfie at a rooftop party. She was wearing a designer jacket, laughing with a cocktail in hand. I didn't need to get involved. The internet did the work for me. But that's not the revenge. That's just the build-up. The actual revenge, that took planning. See, for months now, I'd been working with a nonprofit media collective that focused on youth advocacy. Real stories, real people, platforming the unheard. They'd reached out after my first episode aired and asked if I'd be willing to do a live panel. A keynote. Something about breaking generational patterns and reclaiming narratives. I agreed, but only if I could bring a special project with me. A documentary. One final cut. Not the 3 episodes that had already aired. This would be something new. Something personal. I called it The Ghost in the Family Portrait. And this time, I didn't pull any punches. The documentary opened with a slow pan over childhood photos. Avery and me in matching pajamas. Birthday cakes with both our names. Family road trips where I was always slightly out of frame. The narration was mine, calm and honest. In every family, there's a story no one wants to tell. Sometimes, that story isn't loud. Sometimes, it's the one quietly fading in the background. Then came the raw footage. Clips from home videos where I tried to speak, but got interrupted. Moments where I walked off camera, unnoticed. Audio overlays of my parents praising Avery's sensitivity, her emotional intelligence, her need for more. I included the cancellation of my 16th birthday, the film competition, the night they left me alone, and finally, the GoFundMe, screenshots, receipts, the Reddit post, all presented factually, without commentary. I didn't name names. I didn't need to. The audience connected the dots. But what made the documentary cut deep wasn't the facts. It was the quiet moments in between, the long pause after a sentence, the distant look in my eyes as I spoke, the notebook with curled pages and fading ink. I ended it with a monologue, one I'd written in a fever dream at 3 a.m. after rereading Avery's message 100 times. Forgiveness is a luxury, and sometimes the people who hurt you expect it as payment for your silence. But I'm not silent anymore. I spent years waiting to be seen, and now that I finally am, I refuse to shrink back into the shadows. We premiered the film at the Media Summit in Brooklyn. The room was packed, mostly young creatives, industry reps, a few journalists. When the final frame faded and the lights came up, the room was still. No applause, just stunned silence. Then, a single clap. Then another. Then the room erupted. People stood. Not for me, but for the story. Afterward, a reporter from a major digital outlet pulled me aside. "This isn't just a documentary," she said. "It's a blueprint." I smiled. It's survival. That night, the doc went live on the collective's YouTube channel. Within hours, it had 100,000 views. Within 2 days, 1 million. Comments poured in. From people who had lived it. Who'd been the background kid. The forgotten one. The immature sibling who never got a safe space to fall apart. And while the internet lit up, my phone stayed quiet. Until it didn't. 3 days after the film dropped, my dad called. I let it ring. Then picked up. He didn't start with small talk or accusations. He just said, I watched it. I waited. Then he said something I never expected to hear. I didn't know. I didn't speak. I mean, I should have, but I didn't. I let your mom run the show. I thought I was keeping the peace. I thought if I stayed neutral, that made me a good dad. He exhaled, like the weight had been sitting on his chest for years. I'm sorry, Dean. I really am. I still didn't know what to say, so he filled the silence. We were taking space. Your mom and I. She's having a hard time seeing herself clearly in all this. Avery's staying with her friend. And I've been thinking a lot. Watching everything. You're incredible. Not just talented, but brave. I closed my eyes. Because I wanted to hate him. But I didn't. I just felt tired. What do you want from me? I asked quietly. Nothing, he said. Just to say I see you now. I should have seen you years ago. I'm sorry it took this long. We talked for 20 minutes. About the past. About the documentary. About what it means to show up late, but still show up. And when we hung up, I didn't cry. I just breathed. 2 weeks later, Avery posted a video. No edits. No filters. No makeup. Just her. Sitting on a park bench, hands folded in her lap. She didn't say my name. But she didn't have to. She looked into the camera and said, I watched the documentary. I didn't want to. But I did. And I cried. Not because I felt attacked, but because I finally saw it. The birthday. The theater. The silence I always filled with noise. She paused, swallowed hard. I've made a lot of mistakes. I centered myself in places I shouldn't have. I weaponized my emotions. And I blamed you for leaving when I never let you stay. She looked down. I don't expect forgiveness. But I do want accountability. And I'm taking it. Starting now. The comments were mixed. Some praised her. Others didn't buy it. But I didn't care. Because for once, she wasn't speaking over me. She was listening. The fallout in the months that followed was quiet. The GoFundMe was permanently removed. Her Reddit account suspended for coordinated, inauthentic behavior. A few of her former enablers reached out to me with half-hearted apologies. I replied to none of them. Instead, I focused on what mattered. I signed with a literary agent. Sold the rights to develop a full-length memoir based on the docuseries. I moved into a small apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows and terrible plumbing, but enough light to film in. I started mentoring younger creatives who'd been through similar things. I built something real. And I left the door open, metaphorically, for my family. Not wide open, just unlocked. In case they ever came knocking for the right reasons. But I never went back. Not to the house. Not to the silence. Not to the role they wrote for me without asking. I chose my own ending. And it wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about recognition. And now? Now I'm no longer the ghost in the family portrait. I'm the one holding the camera. My name's Eli, I'm 32, and up until a few months ago, I thought I had a pretty clear understanding of what family meant. I was raised to believe it meant loyalty, sacrifice, and showing up for each other, even when it was inconvenient. Especially when it was inconvenient. But now, let's just say I've been disabused of that notion in the most humiliating, expensive way possible. Growing up, I was the quiet one, the dependable son, the planner, the fixer. My younger sister, Lydia, was the golden child, charismatic, dramatic, always in the middle of some crisis or celebration. If she got a B on a test, it was framed like a comeback story. If I graduated with honors, that was just expected. I didn't resent it back then, not really. I figured being reliable meant I didn't need the spotlight. That maybe one day, all the quiet, behind-the-scenes work I did would mean something. Spoiler alert, it didn't. After college, I landed a solid job in finance, and thanks to some lucky timing and obsessive saving, I started making good money in my late 20s. I never flaunted it. In fact, I used it to help my family, especially after Dad passed away. Mom struggled with the bills, Lydia couldn't keep a job longer than 6 months, and I was the only one with a steady income. So I stepped up, quietly, consistently. I paid the mortgage on the family home. I paid off Lydia's student loans when she ghosted on them. When Mom's car broke down, I wired her enough for a used Honda within the hour. Every month, I sent her $3,000, rent, food, utilities, and a bit more for emergencies. She never asked for it outright, but she always acted like it was expected, like I owed her. I didn't complain. Not once. I just told myself I was doing the right thing. That family helps each other, even if one side does more lifting than the other. But over time, something shifted. Or maybe I just started noticing things I'd trained myself to ignore. Like how I wasn't invited to Lydia's birthday brunch last year. Because, as Mom put it, it's mostly her friends, you'd feel out of place. Or how Thanksgiving somehow got hosted at Lydia's new boyfriend's place, and I was told last minute, there's not enough space, but we'll FaceTime you during dessert. I watched them all clinking glasses and laughing while I sat alone in my apartment eating takeout. I should have said something, drawn a boundary, but I didn't. I smiled, nodded, and wired the usual money on the first of the month like clockwork. But Easter, that was the final straw. 2 weeks before, I called Mom to ask what time I should swing by. I figured I'd bring dessert, maybe some drinks, help set up the table like I always did. There was this long pause on the phone, the kind that made my stomach twist. Then, she sighed and said, Eli, this year's going to be a little different. I stayed quiet. Let her fill the silence. She always did. It's going to be more intimate. Just immediate family. Lydia wants it to feel special, you know? And with her engagement and all, there's a lot of focus on her right now. I just don't want anything to feel awkward. You understand, right? I felt heat rush up my neck. Immediate family? I am immediate family. And awkward? What exactly was awkward about me showing up to a holiday dinner that I've attended every single year of my life? She must have sensed my hesitation because her tone snapped sharper. Please don't make this a thing. You're always so sensitive. We just want a peaceful brunch without any weird energy. You can come by next week and we'll have lunch, just the two of us. I didn't say a word. I couldn't. It was like the floor dropped out under me. She mistook my silence for compliance and added, almost like a warning, Eli, don't make a scene. There it was. That condescending, clipped tone that said more than her words ever could. Like I was some ticking time bomb. An embarrassment. An obligation. I ended the call with a short, okay. Then I sat in my living room for 2 straight hours, phone in my lap, staring at nothing. I thought about every bill I'd paid, every birthday and holiday gift I'd sent, every vacation I'd funded, every time I'd swallowed being the afterthought, the second string, the family ATM. I thought about the mortgage on the house they were hosting this intimate brunch in, the electricity powering the stove where they'd bake Lydia's favorite rosemary ham, the Wi-Fi they'd use to post the inevitable family selfies captioned, "So grateful for this day." Then I got up, walked to my desk, opened my banking dashboard, and one by one, I started shutting it all down. First, the $3,000 monthly transfer. Canceled. Then, the auto payments for the house's electricity, water, and gas. Disabled. Next, I logged into the utility portals. All in my name. I'd set them up that way, years ago, to keep things simple. I'd been paying them so long I didn't even think about it anymore. But now, I called each provider, verified my identity, and scheduled disconnections. Saturday night, midnight, 12 hours before their perfect little brunch. By Sunday morning, their house would be powerless, waterless, and ice cold. And for the first time in years, they'd have to manage something, anything, without me. When Easter Sunday rolled around, I didn't check my phone right away. I went for a walk, got coffee, sat by the lake, and let the quiet wrap around me. For the first time in years, I felt weightless. It wasn't until late afternoon that I glanced at my phone. 27 missed calls. All from Mom, Lydia, and 2 numbers I didn't recognize, probably her fiancé's parents. My chest tightened. I braced myself. Opened the first voicemail. It was Mom. Frantic. Eli, I don't know what's going on, but the power's out and we can't get a hold of the utility company. I thought you were still anyway. Can you call me back? Please. The next one was shorter. Angrier. Are you seriously ignoring us? This is so immature. Lydia's furious. You're ruining everything. Then Lydia, practically shrieking. What's wrong with you, Eli? Do you think this is funny? People are here. We have food that's spoiling, and Mom's freaking out. Grow up and call us back. I just sat there, thumb hovering over the play button for the next message. And that's when something clicked in me. Not spite. Not even satisfaction. Just a deep, undeniable clarity. They were never going to see me as anything other than the help, unless I stopped acting like it. I turned my phone off. And for the first time in a decade, I didn't feel guilty. The next morning, I woke up to an inbox overflowing with emails, missed calls, and text messages that read like a cocktail of guilt-tripping, confusion, and outright rage. From Lydia, you've made your point. Now turn the damn power back on. It's not just about you. From Mom, I'm so disappointed in you, Eli. I never raised you to be vindictive. We've had a difficult year. How could you choose Easter of all days to lash out like this? And my personal favorite, from Lydia's fiancé, bro. I don't know what your problem is, but you embarrassed your mother and your sister in front of my family. Not cool. I didn't respond. I just let them stew. But I wasn't done. Later that afternoon, I sat down at my desk and drafted a single group email. Just one message. No yelling. No insults. Just facts. I typed, "Hi, over the years, I've contributed financially and emotionally to this family without complaint. I paid the mortgage, the bills, the car repairs, the surprise expenses. I did it gladly, under the belief that I was valued and included. Being excluded from a holiday I've celebrated with you since childhood, with the excuse that I would bring weird energy, made something very clear. I'm not considered part of the family. I'm just the one who covers the tabs. Effective immediately, I will no longer be handling any of the house's utilities or sending monthly financial support. I've given more than enough, and I'm stepping back now. I wish you all the best." Eli. I hit send and closed the laptop. For the first time in years, I had nothing tethering me to that house. No financial pipelines running through me. No unspoken obligations keeping me on call like some kind of unpaid assistant. But I'll admit, I didn't feel triumphant. Not yet. Because cutting ties, even toxic ones, doesn't bring instant peace. At least not for me. That night, I lay awake thinking of every childhood Easter, the egg hunts in the backyard, the plastic chairs creaking under too many relatives, Mom laughing at burnt rolls, Lydia making a show of not liking ham even though she ate 3 servings. I remembered the year I got her an engraved bracelet with Dad's initials on it, how she burst into tears and hugged me like I'd hung the moon. I remembered thinking, see? This is what family does. We hold each other up. Somewhere along the way, that changed. I just never noticed how much until I wasn't invited. I went low contact after that. They tried calling a few more times. Lydia even left me a voice message saying she wanted to talk things out and fix it, but only after Mom had posted a passive-aggressive status on Facebook saying, "Some people don't know how to forgive, even on holy days." Forgive what, exactly? That was never clear. Weeks passed. No apology. No reflection. Just silence and whispers through mutual cousins. I heard Mom was scrambling to figure out how to cover the bills. She'd never actually learned to manage the accounts, and Lydia was back on another job hunt after quitting her last one over disrespectful vibes. Meanwhile, I focused on myself. For the first time in years, I started using my weekends for me. I booked a solo trip to Scotland, a place I'd always dreamed of visiting but never dared, because someone always needed something. I took long walks, joined a rock climbing class, and started therapy. I didn't go into it planning to heal from my family, but that's exactly what happened. My therapist, a woman named Margot who somehow saw right through me within 5 minutes, asked a question in our 3rd session that knocked the wind out of me. If they stopped calling today, forever, would your life feel emptier or freer? I didn't answer right away. I still don't think I have to. But then, about 6 weeks after Easter, something unexpected happened. I got a wedding invitation in the mail. Lydia's. Elegant cardstock. Embossed gold letters. Formal script. No +1. No personal note. Just an invite. Like nothing had happened. Like the missed calls, the accusations, the financial leeching, the years of being treated like a disposable resource, none of it mattered. It was surreal. Then I flipped the card over. It was being held at a vineyard. Fancy. Pricey. And coincidentally, a place I recognized. Because I was the one who introduced Lydia to it 3 years ago when I took Mom there for her birthday. At the time, Lydia had said it was pretentious and too quiet. Now it was her wedding venue. I stared at the RSVP card. Then I noticed something else. There was a handwritten note on the back. "Hope you'll reconsider. It would mean a lot to Mom if you showed up. Please don't ruin this day." That's when the anger bubbled back up, hot, bitter, and sharp. Please don't ruin this day. Like I was the problem. Like showing up would somehow taint the perfection of her curated event. Not "please come because we miss you." Not "I'm sorry for how things have gone." Just a veiled warning wrapped in a hollow invitation. That was when I knew. They still didn't get it. They still thought I could be guilt, lured back in by obligation or decorum. That I'd show up with a gift, smile for the photos, and pretend the last decade of being used, ignored, and tossed aside was just water under the bridge. I sat down with the card in my hands, thinking. Then I started making a new plan. One that didn't involve showing up quietly. One that would make sure they never forgot the day they tried to treat me like I was disposable. The vineyard was about 2 hours outside the city. tucked between rolling hills and framed by pale lavender rose and ivy-covered archways. It was the kind of place that screamed Instagram perfect, which was Lydia's entire aesthetic now. I knew because I still followed her fiancé's cousin on social media, not intentionally, but we'd never unfollowed each other after a holiday party years back. She was the one who posted a photo weeks ago, Lydia at a cake tasting, grinning next to a chalkboard that read, "A wedding fit for a queen." A queen. That was fitting. Lydia didn't want a wedding, she wanted a coronation. And I wasn't invited as a brother. I was summoned as a background character. The part that really sealed it for me, though, came a few days later. My Aunt Susan, Mom's sister, called out of the blue. She's always been kind to me in a distant, neutral way. She never got too involved, never picked sides. But she wasn't oblivious either. "Hey, sweetheart," she said, her tone careful. "I wanted to check on you. Your mom's, well, she's been telling everyone you've been acting out lately. That you've cut ties with the family over a miscommunication." I let out a soft, humorless laugh. "Is that what she's calling it?" I wanted to hear your side." So I told her. Not everything, not the financials or the late-night breakdowns after being excluded one too many times, but enough. The Easter snub, the utilities, the voicemails, the wedding invite with the passive-aggressive note. She listened, didn't interrupt, just said, "Jesus," under her breath at one point. Then came the part one wasn't ready for. "Your mom told me she was counting on you for the photographer. Said you'd always been the responsible one." I blinked. "Wait, what?" "She said the package they booked is on hold, that you were going to cover it. You didn't agree to that?" "No," I said slowly. "I haven't spoken to her in weeks. She just assumed." A pause. Then Susan sighed. "I figured. She's telling everyone that you bailed on a promise, Eli. That you're trying to sabotage Lydia's big day." My jaw clenched. Of course. That's how they'd spin it. Not that I'd withdrawn after being treated like an afterthought for years, but that I was some unstable, selfish villain lashing out for attention. That's when the idea crystallized. Not revenge. Not exactly. Just clarity. A mirror. Something to show them, and everyone else, exactly who they were. I started with the photographer. Since Mom had used my name to hold the booking, I called the company directly. Confirmed they hadn't received payment. Confirmed that yes, it was still scheduled for Lydia's wedding under my name. Then I politely canceled the reservation. And I didn't stop there. Over the past few years, I'd connected Lydia and Mom to countless vendors, caterers, florists, rental companies, when they were planning birthdays, showers, you name it. They loved outsourcing everything to me. I was the organized one. The one who had the spreadsheets, the backup plans, the discount codes. So I went through my old emails. Found the paper trails. The vineyard reservation? I didn't book it, but I did refer them to the venue manager. The same manager I'd worked with for a corporate event the year before. So I reached out. Mentioned that I was disinvited from the wedding but had been listed as the point of contact on several documents. Just wanted to make sure everything was squared away. He thanked me for the heads up. Said it was a little odd that the balance hadn't been paid in full yet, and he'd been meaning to follow up. I told him he should probably speak with Lydia directly from now on. And then, finally, I RSVP'd to the wedding. Declined, of course, but not before checking one little box at the bottom that asked if I'd like to leave a message for the bride and groom. "Wishing you all the love and support you've given me these past few years. Congratulations." I hit submit and sat back. But the real storm broke 2 days later. I was in the middle of a meeting when my phone started vibrating nonstop. Missed calls, texts, and one from Aunt Susan that simply read, "Oh no, she's going off." I checked social media. Sure enough, Lydia had posted a story, shaky camera, tears streaking her makeup, her voice rising with every sentence. "This is supposed to be the happiest week of my life, and my brother is going out of his way to destroy everything. I can't believe how cruel someone can be just because they're not the center of attention for once. If you see this, Eli, congratulations. You've ruined it. I hope you're proud." I watched the story, emotionless. And for once, I was proud. Not because I'd ruined anything, but because I'd finally stopped allowing them to pretend I didn't matter while taking everything I gave. Because now, everyone could see it. And the wedding was still 5 days away. I didn't watch the rest of Lydia's meltdown. I didn't need to. Her followers would eat it up. Half of them would sympathize. The other half would message me in private to say, "Dude, what really happened?" But I wasn't interested in defending myself anymore. I was done playing PR manager for a family that only noticed me when I was fixing something they broke. The day before the wedding, I got a call from my mom. I didn't pick up. She tried again, 5 times in a row, then switched to texts. Eli, we need to talk. Please. Don't make this worse than it already is. This isn't just about you. Lydia is devastated. Do you want to break this family apart? And finally, if you don't make this right by tomorrow, don't bother calling me again. That one made me stop. Not because it hurt, but because it was so predictable, so mechanical. Mom always thought threats worked better than apologies. It was her default setting. Emotional blackmail dressed as parental concern. I powered my phone off and left it that way. That night, I packed a small weekend bag, grabbed the envelope I'd prepared weeks ago, and drove 3 hours north to a quiet Airbnb by the lake. No service, no noise. Just pine trees, water, and the sound of wind brushing through the branches. While the rest of my family scrambled to hold a wedding together on a foundation of entitlement and lies, I was sipping coffee on a dock at sunrise, listening to loons call across the water. But I hadn't vanished without a trace. That envelope? It was scheduled for delivery. Inside was a simple letter and 4 flash drives. One for Lydia, one for Mom, one for the venue, one for the photographer's studio. Each flash drive had copies of contracts, emails, and receipts, every financial transaction I had ever covered for them, line by line, categorized, timestamped, and annotated. Mortgage payments, car repairs, rent for Lydia's last 3 apartments, her grad school tuition that she swore she got a scholarship for, even the fake, emergency medical bills she used to get $800 from me one Christmas Eve when I was 28. The letter explained everything without venom, without sarcasm. Just clarity. Truth. I'm not angry anymore, I wrote. But I am done. You've taught me that my value in this family was directly tied to my utility. When I stopped being useful, I stopped being included. I'm not interested in rejoining a system that only values me when I'm invisible. Consider this my final act of generosity. The documentation you'll need to explain to your guests, your vendors, and yourselves how you let a wedding fall apart by treating the one person who held it together like a ghost. I paid extra to have the courier deliver it at noon, right when the first guest would be arriving at the vineyard. According to a cousin who was in attendance, the timing couldn't have been more perfect. The florist showed up, asking about a balance due that was never paid. The tent rental company arrived and announced they hadn't processed final payment and couldn't unload anything. The coordinator was trying to reach Lydia on her dead phone while the photographer, who'd been rebooked last minute after my cancellation, stood awkwardly outside, realizing she didn't have a complete shot list or seating chart. The guests arrived to chaos. No music, no flowers, no clear direction on where to go. Just folding chairs stacked in a corner, and Mom in a frantic rage, barking orders at staff that didn't exist. Then the courier arrived, with the envelope. According to my cousin, Lydia opened it first, saw the flash drives, and said, "What is this? More of Eli's drama." But once she read the letter, her face changed. She went silent, pale. My mom apparently took one look at the numbers on those drives and went absolutely still. For a long time, she didn't speak. And that silence said everything. Because they knew. They'd always known. They just never thought I'd stop. The wedding went on, technically. A skeleton version of what was planned. Lydia walked down a gravel path instead of a flowered aisle. The food arrived late. The DJ played music from a Bluetooth speaker. The bouquet was assembled from leftover centerpiece scraps. People smiled, took pictures, pretended not to notice. But the cracks were everywhere. No one could ignore the absence of the person who used to hold everything together. They just pretended he never mattered. And pretending, it turns out, gets a lot harder when the receipts are delivered to your doorstep. I spent that weekend in peace. Hiking, reading, letting go. And when I came back to the city, I didn't check my phone for another 3 days. When I finally did, there were only 2 messages worth noting. One from Lydia, "I don't forgive you. You humiliated me." And one from Mom, "You broke our family. Are you happy now?" I didn't respond. Because the truth is, I didn't break anything. I just stopped pretending it wasn't already broken. In the weeks that followed, I started building a new life, one that wasn't centered around emotional debt collection. I reconnected with friends I'd lost touch with, took up photography, started a monthly brunch group with coworkers. No drama, no performance, just people who enjoyed each other's presence. And slowly, the guilt that had been baked into me since childhood, This belief that love had to be earned through sacrifice started to dissolve. A few relatives reached out quietly. A cousin, an uncle, even Aunt Susan. They all said variations of the same thing. We didn't know how bad it was. We see you now. And I realized that was enough. I didn't need apologies from the people who'd never offer them. I didn't need some grand reconciliation or a dramatic moment of redemption. I just needed to choose peace and keep choosing it. So I did. And as for the family that once insisted I was too sensitive, too dramatic, too cold, every time I asked for basic respect, they're still out there, still spinning their version of the story, still wondering how they ended up standing at the altar with no flowers, no fans, and no foundation. But me? I'm finally free. And I don't regret a thing. I'm Jake. I'm 32, and I got married last spring. Not that you'd know it from how my family acted. Growing up, it was always obvious that my older brother, Ethan, was the favorite. He was louder, flashier, more charismatic, and in our parents' eyes, apparently more deserving. I was the quieter one, the kid who got good grades without being asked, who didn't cause drama, who handled things himself. At the time, I told myself it was fine. I didn't want the spotlight anyway. I had my books, my guitar, my own little world. But when Ethan got engaged 3 years ago, the curtain was pulled back, and I realized just how far they'd go for their golden boy. His wedding was a full-blown production. I'm talking private venue by the lake, string quartet flown in from another state, a 3-tier cake that looked like a sculpture, and a honeymoon in Greece paid for, of course, by our parents. They even gifted him a brand new $3,000 tailored suit for the ceremony. I remember watching the whole thing play out, smiling and clapping like a good little brother, even though I was practically invisible the entire weekend. I caught our mom whispering to a family friend, "We're just so proud of Ethan. He's always been the one we knew would make it." I stood there holding a glass of champagne, nodding politely while that sentence echoed in my head like feedback from a mic. The one who would make it. I was working full-time in tech by then, had just finished paying off my student loans, and had even helped mom and dad cover some medical bills the year before. But sure, Ethan made it. Fast forward to last year, when I proposed to Leah. She said yes in the middle of a rainy picnic under a little gazebo near where we first met, humble, personal, ours. We decided early on that we wanted something small but meaningful. Not extravagant, just real. We had a budget of about $12,000, all from our own savings. Still, I reached out to my parents and Ethan, hoping they'd want to be involved, maybe help with a few parts of the day like Leah's family offered. I wasn't expecting a $40,000 gala. I wasn't even expecting a catered rehearsal dinner. But I hoped they'd care. What I got instead was months of being treated like a nuisance. When I asked Mom if she'd be willing to help with the flowers or maybe contribute a bit to the food, she replied, "Jake, you know we're still paying off Ethan's wedding. You're doing fine on your own." When I told her we were covering it ourselves and just wanted her input on a few small details, she said, "Well, if you're not doing it properly, I don't want my name attached to it." My dad barely returned my texts, and when he did, it was always one-liners like, "Not sure we'll make it, depends on work," or "Ask your brother, he's good at this stuff." They missed the bridal shower. They didn't offer to host anything. They didn't even ask where the venue was until the week before. I tried to brush it off. I told Leah over and over, "It's fine, they're just not great with this stuff." But deep down, I was crushed. I couldn't shake this heavy, awful feeling in my chest, like I was reliving every ignored birthday and shrugged off achievement from my childhood in slow motion. Leah could see it too. She gently squeezed my hand every time someone asked why my family wasn't more involved. The day of the wedding came, and we poured our hearts into it. It was held at a cozy little outdoor garden venue, with fairy lights strung through the trees and music played by one of my old college friends on his acoustic guitar. Leah looked like she belonged in a painting. My friends showed up. Her family showed up. Even coworkers and neighbors came. But as the ceremony ended and we moved into the reception, I realized my parents hadn't even gotten us a gift. No card, no envelope, nothing. And worse, Mom looked bored. Half the time, she was scrolling on her phone. Dad kept sneaking out to smoke and made a point of telling my uncle how rushed the wedding felt. At one point, I heard him laugh and say, "It's not like Jake wanted a real wedding anyway." Then came the moment that finally snapped the last thread inside me. During dinner, while Leah was talking to her grandma, I sat at our table with Mom and Dad across from me. I tried to smile and say, "Thanks for being here. It means a lot." Mom didn't even look up from her salad. She just said, You should be grateful we even showed up. Your brother's wedding took everything out of us." Then Dad chuckled and added, "He's always needed us more than we needed him. You've always been the independent one, right?" I don't know if they expected me to laugh. Maybe they thought I'd just nod and move on, the way I always had. And I did nod once. But in that moment, something went cold inside me. It wasn't anger, not exactly. It was more like a wall going up. A quiet understanding that whatever thread of obligation or love I had been clinging to was frayed beyond repair. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I just looked at them, really looked at them, and thought, "You think I owe you something. But the only thing I owe you now is nothing." I spent the rest of the night being gracious. I danced with Leah, thanked guests, made speeches, took pictures, and didn't let them see a single crack. But the next morning, I was already making calls. You see, for years now, I've been handling more than they ever realized. When their old car broke down, I helped Dad finance a used one. Technically, the loan was in my name. When Mom lost her part-time job, I covered their Wi-Fi and phone bills just until she got back on her feet. I even added them as authorized users on my Costco card so they could shop for groceries cheaper. They were living in a rental I owned, half below market value, and I let them believe it was some kind of family discount. Truth is, I was tired of seeing them struggle. I thought I was doing the right thing, but I'd never once gotten a thank you. Not when I bailed them out of credit card debt. Not when I covered a month of missed rent without telling them. Not even when I bought Ethan a new laptop for grad school because Mom said you have more money than us. It had always been expected. Just another way I was supposed to make up for being the quiet one, the one who didn't get into trouble, the one who didn't ask for much. And now, here I was, married to the love of my life, and my own parents treated it like a boring chore. A checkbox to tick off. Something they'd rather not be part of, but felt obligated to attend just so they could claim they did. So I made the first call to the bank, then the landlord for their place, then the utility providers. I wasn't mean. I wasn't vindictive. I just undid what I had done. Slowly, carefully, thoroughly. And right as things began to unravel for them, they had no idea I was the one pulling the thread. The first domino to fall was the house. Technically, it was a small 2-bedroom rental on the edge of town, but they'd called it home ever since I bought it 5 years ago. Back then, they were drowning in overdue rent after Dad got laid off and Mom's hours got cut. Ethan, of course, was too busy helping his then-fiancée plan their lavish engagement trip to Italy. So I stepped in, bought the property under my name, and let them stay in it for less than half of what I could have charged. I even handled minor repairs myself instead of calling in contractors, just to save them the embarrassment. I called the property manager I'd been using to handle my other rentals and asked her to prepare a formal notice. The lease wouldn't be renewed. I gave them 60 days, generous by any standard, and made sure it was all perfectly legal. Then I told her to start prepping the place for market value rent as soon as they were out. She hesitated at first. She knew it was my parents, but I simply said, "Business is business," and moved on. Next was the car. Dad's sedan was financed under my name because his credit was a mess. I'd made the monthly payments for nearly 2 years. When I bought my new SUV last summer, I'd quietly transferred full insurance coverage for his car onto my own policy to keep costs down for him. He never knew. So I called the bank, checked the payoff amount, and sold it back through a dealership trade-in. Since it was under my name, I didn't even need their approval. The only call I made was to the insurance company to remove the car from the policy. When Dad came outside a few days later and saw the empty driveway, he thought it was stolen. I know because he called me. "Jake," he said, voice tight, "I think someone took the car. It's gone." I was at work, staring at my monitor, sipping coffee like nothing had happened. "Oh," I said calmly, "no. I traded it in. The title was under my name, remember?" There was a long silence, then a confused, sputtering. "Wait, what do you mean you traded it in? That was my car." "No, Dad. You used the car. It was always mine. I just let you drive it. You can't be serious. I need that for work." "You haven't worked in 7 months," I replied flatly. "Remember? You told Uncle Rob you were semi-retired now." He started yelling, but I told him I was in a meeting and hung up. I didn't block his number. I didn't scream back. I just ended the call like a closing door. Then came the utilities. Mom's phone plan, under my account. I'd set it up when her old phone died, and she panicked at the price of a replacement. So I bundled her into my family plan, paid the bills silently, and never asked for a dime. Same with their internet. streaming services, even their Costco card. All of it billed to me. One by one, I canceled every auto payment. On a chilly Wednesday morning, I got a barrage of missed calls and voicemails. First was Mom, her voice sharp and accusing. "Jake, the internet's down. What's going on? Your father's furious. He can't even check his email." Then another one. "Jake, our phones aren't working. Did the company mess up again? Fix this, please." Then a text. "Why is the water off? Are you seeing these? Call me back. Is this some kind of joke?" I didn't respond. Instead, I sat on the couch with Leah, who knew everything by now. I'd told her the night of the wedding what I planned to do, not in a vengeful rage, but with quiet, clear certainty. She didn't try to stop me. She just nodded and said, "About time." Still, even with her support, I didn't feel triumphant. Not yet. There was an ache inside me. Not guilt exactly, but something deeper. A hollow sort of mourning. I wasn't punishing strangers. I was closing the door on my own parents. The people who raised me. The people I had once desperately wanted approval from. But every time I considered backing down, I remembered Mom's voice at the reception. "You should be grateful we even showed up." That sentence lived in my head rent-free. I had paid for my own wedding. Every flower, every chair, every damn napkin. And she made it sound like their attendance was a charitable act. And then Dad's smirk. "He's always needed us more than we needed him." That line didn't sting. It infuriated me. I'd been carrying them for years. Quietly. Without fanfare. And they still believed they were doing me a favor by existing in my life. No more. A week after everything went down, Ethan texted me. "Dude, what did you do? Mom's losing her mind. She says you're being spiteful and ungrateful. Are you okay?" I stared at the screen for a while. I wasn't even angry at him. Just tired. I replied, "I'm fine. Just reallocating my resources." Ethan texted, "Jake, come on. This isn't you." That part actually made me laugh. Because it was me. It just wasn't the version they were used to, the polite, invisible younger brother who never said no, never stood up for himself, never asked to be seen. So I typed one more reply. "Maybe this is me. You just never noticed." I didn't get a response. Leah's family, by the way, had been nothing but warm and supportive through all of this. Her mom called us weekly just to say hi. Her dad sent me articles he thought I'd like. They treated me like a son, not because I paid their bills, but because I loved their daughter and showed up when it mattered. That contrast made everything sting sharper, but also gave me clarity. Love isn't measured in what people say at big events. It's measured in who helps you clean up afterward, who asks how you're doing on a random Tuesday, who notices when something's wrong, and who shows up when it counts. My parents showed up to my wedding physically, but emotionally, they never arrived. And now, as their world began to shrink, bill by bill, convenience by convenience, I didn't feel vengeful. I felt free. And yet, I knew the storm was coming. The storm hit 3 days later. It started with a letter, certified mail. I'd already given the property manager permission to send it. It was simple, formal, and airtight. "This is a 60-day notice to vacate the premises at 118 Maplewood Drive. Your lease will not be renewed. We wish you well." I didn't even have to be there for the fallout. But of course, they made sure I'd hear it. First came the voicemail from Mom, half furious, half frantic. "Jake, what is this letter? Why would you even think about evicting us? Is this some kind of mistake? Call me. Right now? This isn't funny." Then another one, her voice wobbling now. "Your father's pacing around like he's going to have a stroke. You don't mean this. You can't mean this. We've lived here for 5 years." That was followed by a message from Dad, who went from anger to manipulation in record time. "I'm disappointed, Jake. After everything we've done for you. You wouldn't even have your job if it weren't for my advice back in college. You need to grow up. This is family." That one made me pause. For a moment, my hand hovered over my phone. There was still a small, flickering part of me that longed for things to be different. That maybe if I just explained everything, laid it all out, they'd suddenly see me clearly for the first time. But I knew better. They didn't want to understand. They just wanted to regain control. I didn't respond. Instead, I waited until the weekend. Then I drove to the house, not to talk, not to argue, but to collect the spare keys I had stashed in the storage box out back. I knew they weren't home. They had lunch with some family friends every Saturday at noon like clockwork. I walked through the old place silently, noting the scuff marks in the hallway, the pile of unopened mail, the same cheap curtains Mom insisted still looked fine. There was no warmth here. Not anymore. Just a house they'd lived in long enough to mistake for something they earned. I left a small envelope on the kitchen table. Inside, I'd printed out a detailed list. All the payments I'd made. The monthly utilities, rent discounts, loan balances, grocery deliveries. Every silent favor. Every unacknowledged lifeline. The total at the bottom? $62,500. At the end, I'd written in simple black ink, "This is what never needing you looked like." Then I locked the front door, slid the key back into my pocket, and drove home. That evening, Ethan showed up at my place. No warning, no text, just knocked on the door like we were still brothers who dropped by for football games and drinks. Leah answered it before I could get to the door. "Hey," Ethan said, awkward and sheepish. "Is Jake here?" I came around the corner and crossed my arms. "Didn't expect to see you." "I figured," he said, forcing a laugh. "Look, I'm not here to fight. But Mom's a mess. Dad's threatening to call a lawyer. They're saying you blindsided them." "I didn't blindside them," I replied calmly. "They just refused to look." He exhaled and rubbed the back of his neck. "They said you're trying to ruin them." "I'm not ruining anyone," I said. "I'm just done sponsoring them." Ethan looked around, like he was seeing my home for the first time. The quiet comfort of it. The framed photo of Leah and me from our honeymoon. The new furniture I'd saved up for. The life I built. "They were going to leave everything to you, you know," he said. "In their will. The house, the savings." I couldn't help it. I laughed. A bitter, hollow sound. "Ethan, they don't own the house." "I do." "And the savings?" "I am the savings." He looked taken aback. I stepped closer, voice low and steady. "You've spent your whole life believing you were the center of the family. And they let you believe that because it was easier than facing the truth, that I've been the one holding everything together. Quietly. Without applause. Without expectation. But I'm done now." He looked like he wanted to argue. But then he just nodded, jaw tight, and turned to leave. Before he stepped out, I added, "Tell them the 60-day clock is ticking. After that, I'll be putting the house on the market." He froze, back still turned to me. "You really don't care anymore, do you?" I shrugged. "I care. I just don't enable." The door closed behind him with a soft click. Leah slipped her hand into mine, and for the first time in a long time, I felt light. Not because I had hurt them, but because I had finally chosen myself. But the drama wasn't over. Not yet. Because 2 days later, I received an envelope from a law firm, certified and stamped. Inside was a letter. My parents were trying to sue me for improper eviction, emotional distress, and financial exploitation. And I just smiled. I read the letter 3 times, slowly, carefully, sipping my coffee as the sun crept through the blinds. It was laughable, really. The kind of amateur legal scare tactic you'd expect from someone who binge-watched courtroom dramas and thought they understood real estate law. The letter accused me of abuse of authority, manipulative financial control, and my personal favorite, weaponizing familial obligations. That last one almost made me spit out my drink. Leah came into the kitchen and saw the envelope in my hand. "Is that from your parents?" "Technically, from their lawyer," I said. "Well, someone pretending to be one. Should we be worried?" I shook my head. "Not even a little. I know exactly what I'm doing. And they're bluffing." Still, I forwarded it to my actual attorney, Daniel, who I'd hired shortly after my wedding when I first started unraveling the financial web my parents were tangled in. He called me back within the hour and chuckled the second he picked up. "Jake, this is nothing. They didn't even use the right template for an eviction dispute. And the lawyer they're using? Not licensed in the state. I'll draft a formal response. You've got nothing to worry about." I thanked him and hung up, feeling something I hadn't felt in months. Peace. Real peace. Not the fragile, conditional kind I'd built growing up, always tied to making my parents happy, but the solid kind that comes from drawing a line and standing firm behind it. Still, I didn't want things to escalate into public drama. I didn't post anything online. I didn't rant on Facebook or send angry texts to the family group chat, which I had long since muted. I just lived. Quietly. Cleanly. While the 60 days ticked by, the retaliation came quickly and predictably. First, they tried guilt. Mom called and left a voicemail in tears, saying how humiliated she was, how she couldn't believe her own son would turn on her. She begged me to reconsider, reminded me of all the things we've done for you. The vague platitudes she'd always used when backed into a corner. Then came anger. A message from Dad. I'll tell everyone what you're doing. You're selfish. Cold. We let you into this world. We can take you out of our world too. To which I replied, you already did. Emotionally, a long time ago. After that, silence. The kind of silence that simmers. That waits and watches, hoping I'd crack. I didn't. Instead, I prepared for the sale. Cleaned up the property. Took new photos. Had it appraised. It was worth more than I thought, thanks to market shifts and some of the cosmetic upgrades I'd paid for over the years. I didn't smile at the number. I just filed it away under what comes next. The eviction date came, and I didn't hear a word. Not from Mom. Not from Dad. Not from Ethan. I didn't go by the house. I let the property manager handle the key collection. She called me that evening and said simply, they're gone. Didn't even leave a forwarding address. A few days later, I got a text from a number I didn't recognize. You win. Hope it was worth it. Mom. I stared at it for a moment. And then I deleted it. No reply. No fanfare. Because this wasn't about winning. It was about ending a chapter that should have closed years ago. I sold the house 2 weeks later. Cash buyer. No fuss. The money went straight into a separate savings account I opened under my name and Leah's. That account is now the foundation for the future we're building. A new house of our own. One where no one feels like a guest at their own dinner table. One where love isn't measured by guilt or obligation or who paid for what. And that brings me to the part of this story I didn't expect to write. 6 months after the sale, Leah and I were sitting on our back porch, just enjoying a quiet evening when we got a letter. No envelope, just a folded piece of paper tucked under our door. I opened it slowly, expecting some last-ditch guilt trip or maybe a final passive-aggressive jab. But instead, it read, Jake, you were right. We took advantage. We expected too much. We didn't see you, and we're sorry. Love, Mom. That was it. No grand apology. No offer to make things right. Just a sentence. A whisper of something that might have been accountability, had it not arrived far too late. I showed it to Leah. She didn't say anything, just reached out and took my hand. What are you going to do? She asked. I looked at the letter for a while, then set it down on the table and said, nothing. Because I had already done everything I needed to do. I didn't need an apology to validate my choices. I didn't need closure from the people who refused to give it when it mattered. I had made peace with the fact that some families don't heal. Some stories don't wrap up in neat little bows. And sometimes, the only way to write a better future is to stop rereading the past. Ethan and I haven't spoken since that day he showed up at my door. I heard through a cousin that he and his wife are expecting. I wish them well, from a distance. Quietly, without fanfare. My parents, as far as I know, moved in with one of Mom's sisters. Or maybe rented a cheaper apartment nearby. I'm not sure. I stopped checking, and they stopped trying. Now, when I walk through my house, I don't flinch when the phone rings. I don't dread birthdays or holidays. I don't brace for guilt trips disguised as small talk. Instead, I play guitar on Sundays. I cook dinner with Leah, and we dance in the kitchen. I host friends, laugh too loudly, and live without apology. And every now and then, when I think back on everything, on the $40,000 wedding they gave Ethan, on the silent sacrifices I made, on the dinner table where they said I should be grateful they even showed up, I just smile to myself and think, no, they should have been grateful. But now, I've stopped showing up for people who never once showed up for me. And it feels good. I'm Alex, 33 years old, and for the better part of a decade, I've been the designated, responsible one in my family. You know the type, the single sibling with a stable job, the one who remembers birthdays, shows up early to family events, and always picks up the tab when someone forgets their wallet. I work in finance, nothing glamorous, but I've done well for myself. I bought my own apartment, drive a modest car, and keep my expenses tight. The rest of my family, though? Let's just say they perfected the art of chaos. My younger brother, Brandon, 29, hops between gigs like he's allergic to stability. My older sister, Denise, 38, is married with 3 kids and constantly posts about grinding hard on social media, even though I've never once seen her hold a job longer than 6 months. And my parents, Dad especially, still believe that if you're not married with kids, your money is up for grabs. Christmas has always been a little tense for me. It's not that I don't love the holiday, I do. But every year, it turns into this bizarre pressure cooker where I'm expected to step in and help out a little more than everyone else. That usually means covering some groceries, maybe slipping a $50 bill into one of the kids' stockings when Denise forgets, or pretending I didn't notice that Brandon's homemade gift still had a barcode on it. But this year, it hit a different level. Christmas morning had its usual blend of chaos and cheer. Kids tearing through wrapping paper like raccoons, Mom insisting everyone eat something before presents, and Dad holding court in the recliner with his coffee like he was overseeing a kingdom. I sat on the edge of the couch, sipping tea, smiling at the noise. The gifts were nice at first. Everyone seemed to have gone all out. New iPads for the kids, luxury skincare for Denise, a designer wallet for Brandon, and a fancy espresso machine for Mom and Dad. I got socks. I'm not exaggerating. 3 pairs. And a card that just said, "You're the glue that holds us together." No signature. It was around brunch when things started to tilt sideways. We just sat down, scrambled eggs, waffles, overpriced salmon my mom kept bragging about, when I got the notification. My phone buzzed, and without thinking, I glanced at the screen. A charge from a luxury retailer. Another from a travel agency. And then a big one, $2,826.34 from the gift delivery service we'd supposedly used for the family's presents. My stomach dropped. I opened my banking app and saw them all charges made over the past week, racking up under my name. My credit card. Every single one. My hand froze on the fork. I stared at the screen, trying to process it, trying to tell myself this was some sort of mix-up. I looked up, and Dad was already watching me. "Oh," he said, with the casual confidence of someone who'd already rehearsed this. "That went through, huh?" I blinked. "What went through?" He reached for the butter. "The gifts. Brandon and Denise said they were a little short this year, and your mom and I thought it'd be nice if we all got something meaningful. And since you don't have a family of your own, it made sense for you to pitch in a little more." I didn't say anything. I just stared at him. Denise was feeding her youngest and didn't look up. Brandon was too busy smearing jam on his waffle to even pretend he wasn't listening. Dad looked at me again. "Alex, come on. It's not like you're broke. You're always going on about how well your investments are doing. Don't act like it's a big deal." Mom chimed in then, voice chirpy and clueless. "And you don't have to shop for a wife or kids. You're practically saving money, honey. This is just how families work." I nodded slowly. "Sure," I said. My voice didn't crack. I didn't shout. I didn't even raise an eyebrow. I just sipped my tea and said, "This will be the last time." That seemed to satisfy them. Brandon grinned and lifted his glass. "To Alex, the MVP," he said, half mocking. Denise giggled. Even the kids started clapping, not understanding what they were clapping for. I excused myself right after brunch. Said I needed to take a walk, get some air. No one followed me. What they didn't know was that while I was out walking, I was on the phone with my bank. I had a good relationship with my bank's fraud department. Perks of being the guy who always keeps his books balanced. I explained the situation, walked them through the timeline, the unauthorized charges, the whole speech about how my card was clearly used without my consent. I knew the system well. I knew exactly which buttons to press, which phrases to use to trigger an immediate review. Within an hour, the card was frozen. Within 3, the major charges were flagged and marked for reversal. I got another notification that night, a group message from the family. Denise had planned a post-holiday trip to a ski resort. Flights, hotel, rentals. Non-refundable, of course. And all of it had been booked with the points and perks from my card. Points that were now gone. Her message was full of panicked emojis and passive-aggressive, not blaming anyone. But this is seriously messed up language. I didn't respond. The next morning, I got a text from Mom. "Something's wrong with my card," she wrote. "They said it was declined at the pharmacy. Can you check what's going on?" I didn't answer her either, because that was only the beginning. I had spent years putting up with their entitlement, quietly paying for their messes, letting their comments about my freedom and disposable income roll off me like water. I let them guilt-trip me for not being married, not having kids, not being more like Brandon or Denise. I stayed silent because it was easier than fighting. But this wasn't a misstep. This was a decision. They had decided I was their bank. What they didn't realize was I was about to close the vault for good. I got back to my apartment that night and sat at my desk, the Christmas lights I hadn't bothered to take down yet blinking quietly in the background. There was still wrapping paper on the floor and a coffee mug with a red lipstick stain I didn't recognize, probably Denise's, from the one time she stopped by last week to check on me and ended up borrowing my wireless headphones. I stared at it for a while, then opened my laptop. I wasn't angry. not in the way I used to be. Years ago, I might have cried, might have called a friend to vent, or tried to reason with my parents like a responsible adult. But this wasn't that version of me. This version was calm. I had facts, and I had power, and for the first time in a long time, I was ready to use both. First, I pulled up a folder I hadn't opened in over a year. Family expenses. I'd kept track of every transfer, every temporary loan, every purchase I made on behalf of someone else. I wasn't obsessive, I was just organized. Maybe a little too organized. I scrolled through the spreadsheet. Birthday gifts for the nieces and nephews, hotel rooms I'd booked as a backup. When Brandon's card got declined, the down payment I helped Denise with just until tax season. And the emergency root canal I covered for Dad that somehow still didn't warrant a thank you. Total, $41,763.12 over 7 years. I took a breath and added the Christmas charges at the bottom. Then I started typing. It began with emails. Professional, polite, borderline cold. One to Denise. Hey, just a heads up, all charges related to the group trip were reversed by the bank. Since it was booked under my account, they flagged it as fraud. I suggest calling the resort directly. One to Brandon. You'll need to return the watch. The charge didn't go through. I'd recommend doing it before they issue a penalty. One to Mom and Dad. Unfortunately, I can't continue covering incidental expenses. Please ensure you update your payment methods going forward. Also, I'd appreciate it if you stopped using my Netflix account. I've deactivated all shared access. Then came the more subtle pieces. I logged into the shared Dropbox folder our family used for planning trips, sharing photos, and managing group expenses. I removed myself. Then I deleted the folder entirely. I changed my PayPal password, cut off all auto debits linked to Brandon's random side hustles, and canceled the Amazon family plan I'd been footing the bill for, the one Mom thought was included with Wi-Fi. Still not done. The next day, I went to the post office and mailed certified letters to each of them. Yes, actual physical mail. Inside each envelope was a printed spreadsheet detailing what I'd spent on them over the years, not to shame them, but to inform them. Attached to each was a typed note. This isn't about money. This is about boundaries. Going forward, I won't be contributing to family expenses, trips, gifts, or emergencies unless previously agreed upon in writing. If you have concerns, please contact an accountant. I've included an itemized breakdown for your records. Happy New Year, Alex. 3 days of silence. Then the call started. Mom first, sobbing, of course. Why would you humiliate us like this? A letter? Really? I calmly reminded her she never once asked before charging that pharmacy bill to my card. She said that wasn't the same. Family doesn't keep score, she hissed. I let that one hang in the air before responding. No, family doesn't steal either. Then Denise, you're being dramatic, Alex. It's Christmas. Everyone's broke in January. I told her I wasn't. And I didn't plan to be, especially not for someone who couldn't even be bothered to sign a card. She called me selfish. I called her entitled. She hung up. Brandon texted me. Just 2 words. Wow, petty. So I texted back. You owe me $6,200. Should I send you a Venmo request? Or would that be too dramatic too? He didn't reply. But the real twist, the one that made my hands shake when it came in, was from Dad. He didn't yell. He didn't mock. He didn't say anything at first. Just sent me a picture. The living room, empty. No tree. No gifts. No espresso machine. Just him and Mom sitting on the couch, arms crossed, looking like they'd just gotten home from a funeral. Then the message, your mother is crying. She couldn't pay for her heart medication today. Do you feel better now? I stared at it for a long time. Longer than I cared to admit. And here's the thing. I didn't feel better. Not yet. Because I knew this wasn't over. I knew that was just their opening move. The guilt, the emotional manipulation, the public performance of heartbreak, all of it was coming. They were regrouping, retooling, preparing to turn this around on me, to make me the villain. But I was already ahead of them. Because what none of them knew, what none of them even thought to consider, was that the last time I let my dad guilt trip me, I'd started documenting everything. The texts, the bank transfers, even the time I bailed out Brandon after that misunderstanding at the electronics store. I had records, emails, screenshots, legal advice, all of it, neatly organized, quietly prepared, because I'd suspected this day would come. And I wasn't just done being their ATM. I was about to become their reckoning. And trust me, I still wasn't done. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I was anxious, quite the opposite. It was the first time in years I felt alert. Clear. Like someone had finally turned on the lights in a room I'd been stumbling around in for decades. I made myself a cup of coffee around 2 a.m. and sat on the couch with my laptop resting on my knees. I opened a blank document and started typing, not out of anger, but with purpose. It was time to take everything I knew, everything I'd endured, and make it count. By morning, I had compiled a 22-page dossier. Sounds dramatic, I know. But when you've spent most of your adult life being bled dry by people who love you just enough to keep you useful, you start seeing everything like a ledger. There were dates, transaction IDs, text messages, photos of receipts, even voice memos I'd saved out of habit when Brandon once begged me to co-sign a car lease. Which I hadn't. Thank God. But that wasn't the important part. The important part was this. I now had a full timeline. One that, if I needed to, I could show to a court, a bank, or even just a friend to explain why I'd finally cut ties. But more than that, it was a mirror. Something I could hand back to my family and say, "This is what you made me." I didn't send it. Not yet. Timing mattered. And besides, I had something else in mind first. Saturday morning rolled in cold and gray. I dressed in jeans and a jacket, grabbed my folder, and drove across town to visit someone I hadn't seen in a while, my Aunt Carla. Carla was my mom's older sister, the black sheep of the family. She never married, lived alone with 2 greyhounds, and had spent most holidays traveling abroad to avoid the screaming. But she'd always liked me. At family reunions, she used to sneak me her second dessert and whisper things like, "You're too smart to get stuck here." When I showed up at her door, she blinked once and said, "Took you long enough." We talked for 3 hours. I showed her everything, the charges, the letters, the screenshots. I thought maybe she'd tell me to go easy, that blood is blood, that forgiveness matters. But instead, she said, they always did treat you like a safety net. About time it snapped. Turns out, she had her own stories, ones that made mine seem mild. My mom had borrowed money from her years ago, never paid it back. My dad once tried to rope her into a shady tax write-off scheme. Denise had asked her to babysit for a whole week and never even offered gas money. We weren't black sheep. We were survivors. Carla gave me the name of a financial mediator she trusted, someone who specialized in quietly unwinding family entanglements. "In case they try to drag you into court or smear your name," she said, handing me a card. "Cover your bases." I left with something even more valuable: clarity. This wasn't revenge anymore. It was self-preservation. Back home, I drafted a message. Simple. Straightforward. I posted it in the family group chat, where for once, I had something to say that wasn't a payment confirmation or a holiday greeting. "Hey everyone, I've decided to take a step back from all financial involvement moving forward. That includes gifts, shared expenses, and emergency support. I've been covering more than my share for years, and it's time I refocus on building a life of my own. I won't be discussing this any further. Please respect my boundaries." The read receipts started popping up one by one. Denise first, then Mom, then Brandon, finally Dad. Silence, then chaos. Denise replied with a long paragraph about how I was tearing the family apart and letting money get in the way of love. Brandon followed up with something about how I was lucky to have family at all, which was rich, coming from a guy who once tried to pawn my laptop during a rough patch. Mom's reply was a voice note. Crying. Muffled words. I didn't even play it. Just deleted it. And Dad? He didn't message. He called. I let it ring. 3 times. Then I blocked his number. And that was when the calls started coming from other numbers. Aunt Teresa. Cousin Greg. Even Denise's husband, who hadn't spoken to me since 2019 when I called out his MLM scheme. All suddenly concerned. All deeply shocked that I would abandon the family in such a public and hurtful way. So I decided to go a little more public. I made a post. Not on Facebook. I knew better than that. No, I posted on LinkedIn. A professional, respectful statement. After many years of quietly shouldering financial obligations on behalf of extended family members, I've made the decision to step away and invest in my own future. Boundaries are not betrayals. They're lifelines. If you're struggling with guilt around saying no, I promise, you're not alone. It got over 200 likes and a dozen private messages. From coworkers, former classmates, even a few distant relatives I barely remembered. People saying, "Thank you. I needed to hear this." I thought it was just me. That night, Carla texted me. Just 2 words. Nice move. But the next morning, things took another turn. I was eating breakfast, quiet morning, jazz on in the background, when I got an email from Brandon's business account. Subject line, cease and desist. I laughed out loud. Attached was a badly written PDF threatening legal action for defamation, loss of reputation, and emotional distress. He was demanding I take down the LinkedIn post and issue a public apology. I didn't reply. Instead, I forwarded it to the financial mediator Carla had recommended. Then I opened a new email to my employer, a request to update my emergency contacts. Because the people listed there, Mom, Dad, and Denise, no longer represented my support system. They were no longer family, not in the way that mattered. And what none of them knew was that I had just filed paperwork that would take everything one step further. I wasn't just walking away from their finances. I was about to legally sever the last thread that connected us. And I hadn't even told them what I was doing with the trust fund. I learned long ago that with my family, silence was safer than transparency. But that trust? That was the final card, one they thought I didn't have. When my grandfather passed away, my mom's father, he left behind a modest but well-managed trust. The stipulations were clear. The fund would be split evenly among the grandchildren, but only upon reaching the age of 30. There was a clause, though, a quiet line my grandfather had insisted on that most of the family forgot. If any heir has received over $10,000 in monetary or material support from another heir over a cumulative period of 10 years, that support may be deducted from the final distribution, pending documentation. At the time, it seemed like one of those overly cautious, archaic legal terms. But my grandfather was a smart man. He knew this family. And now, so did I. The trust was scheduled to pay out in March, 3 months away. Each grandchild would receive approximately $125,000. A life-changing amount. Enough to pay off debt, buy a home, start over. And since my cousins had all kept to themselves and lived their own lives, the only people eligible for deduction under the clause were me, Brandon, and Denise. So I called the trustee, a woman named Joyce, sharp as a knife and equally precise. I made an appointment, showed her my meticulously kept records, signed declarations of support, printed receipts, and even the certified letters I'd sent. She reviewed everything with professional detachment and finally said, "It's uncommon for this clause to be triggered. But I'll be honest, your documentation is airtight. This could reduce their payout significantly." "Good," I said. "I'd like to proceed. Would you like them to be notified before the distribution is finalized?" I smiled. "No. Let them find out the morning it lands." Because I wasn't after drama anymore. I wasn't after revenge. I was after peace, and this was the last door I had to close. The days that followed were eerily quiet. My phone stayed silent. My inbox stopped blinking with family emails. Denise deleted me from Instagram. Brandon unfriended me. Mom stopped sending chain messages and guilt-tripping religious memes. Even Dad disappeared behind the veil of his own pride. It was like I'd become a ghost, and I loved it. For the first time in years, I started sleeping better. I started waking up without that weight on my chest, the one that used to make me dread birthdays, holidays, even random Sunday texts from my siblings. I went on walks. I booked a trip. I took a cooking class. I laughed with people who never once asked me for money. Then, March arrived. I was in Spain, Barcelona, sipping espresso at a quiet cafe by the marina when I got the email confirmation. Trust disbursement complete. I opened it slowly, watching the sunlight flicker off the harbor, and smiled as I read the line. Alexander Cole, $125,000 disbursed. Brandon Cole, $36,570 disbursed, adjusted. Denise Martin, $22,220 disbursed, adjusted. And just below that, a short footnote, reductions based on cumulative support received from fellow beneficiary Alexander Cole between 2015 and 2023, per Clause 7B. I closed the email and raised my glass to the breeze. It tasted like closure. It didn't take long for the fallout to begin. The first message came from Brandon, of course. 5 missed calls, then a text. "What did you do?" Then Denise. "Is this some kind of joke? Joyce won't return my emails. Tell me you didn't actually take our shares." I didn't reply to either. The next came from Mom. This one I expected would be the hardest, but it wasn't. "Alex, please. Whatever you did, undo it. Brandon has rent due." Denise is in tears. "Your father's furious. I don't understand how you could do this to your family." I stared at the message for a while, then typed back. "I didn't do anything to the family. I just stopped letting the family do things to me. Then I blocked her. A week passed. Then another. No calls. No emails. No sudden change of heart. They didn't apologize. They didn't reflect. They didn't beg for forgiveness or promise to do better. And I didn't expect them to. Because people like that don't change when they lose access to your money. They just change their target. But I'd taken myself off the table. Completely. I moved. Quietly. Sold the apartment I'd once let Denise crash in. Closed the accounts Brandon had access to. Changed jobs, even changed my number. Not to run away, but to start. And somewhere, in the silence they left behind, I found something I hadn't felt in years. Pride. Not because I won. Not because I'd managed to outmaneuver a toxic family. But because I finally chose myself. Because after 33 years of playing the dependable, silent, self-sacrificing son and brother, I finally said, no to the guilt. No to the emotional blackmail dressed up as tradition. No to the manipulations masquerading as love. No to being everyone's financial emergency plan. No to being the background character in a family drama I never agreed to star in. And I'll be honest, some nights, I still think about them. About the Christmas mornings. The birthdays. The noise, the chaos, the laughter that sometimes felt real. But then I remember, love without respect is just control and prettier wrapping paper. So here I am now, sitting on a balcony in a city I never thought I'd visit, writing this all down for the first time. Not because I need closure anymore, I've had that. But because maybe someone else out there is still buried under the weight of obligation, guilt, and family duty. Maybe someone else is still paying for everyone's gifts, silently swallowing resentment with every transaction. To that person, I say this: it's not your job to bankrupt your life so everyone else can feel rich. Say no. Say it twice. Say it until they hear you, or until you're too far away for them to reach. Because family isn't who needs you most. It's who respects you enough to never expect more than you're willing to give. And if they can't do that, let them feel the silence. It costs you nothing. And them? Well, they'll finally learn what your generosity was really worth.